Chapter 667. For the next 2 days, Jean Canwin and I stayed in the room with the fatty. Although God's punishment had passed, we didn't know if it would befall again. After all, the purpose of God's punishment was to find out what the fatty had seen. But now, Jean Canwin and I had seen that sentence, and the fatty was still alive. The purpose of God's punishment hadn't been achieved, and we couldn't guarantee if there would be a next time. Jean Canwin and I were fine. Under God's punishment, we had profited from the disaster, and our power had increased. Even if God's punishment befell again, we would still have the power to fight back. However, the fatty was currently at his weakest. If it came again, he wouldn't be able to survive. So, we could only stay close to him and take care of him. On the other hand, although Jean Canwin had checked the fatty's body and said that he was fine and would wake up within 3 days, the power of God's punishment was unpredictable. Even Jean Canwin himself didn't dare to say that there was absolutely no problem with the results of his examination. We could only stay by the fatty's side to prevent any other accidents. Time passed quickly. In the next 2 days, nothing happened. The fatty's condition was neither good nor bad. He was still lying on the bed in a coma. His breathing was stable, and his body temperature was normal. However, he didn't respond to external stimuli. Jean Canwin said that he would sleep for 3 days, so I wasn't in a hurry and took care of him personally every day. On the 3rd day, because I knew that the fatty would wake up today, I didn't go anywhere for the entire day. I ate in the room. The day was very short. Soon, the sky darkened. The sun was setting in the west. Through the window, I saw that some of the tall buildings in the surrounding area had already lit up, preparing to welcome the darkness. At that moment, the fatty was still lying on the bed, and there was no sign of him waking up. I started to feel anxious and kept pacing in the room. Jean Canwin came in from outside the door and glanced at the fatty from afar. He sat opposite me and asked softly, "Still not awake?" I didn't answer, but frowned and shook my head. Jean Canwin's complexion wasn't any better than mine. In the past few days, besides occasionally taking care of little Wang-Li, he had spent most of his time sitting in the room with me, waiting for the fatty's news. Obviously, he was worried about the fatty and the counterattack of God's punishment. In this dusk, time seemed to have frozen, becoming slow and heavy, pressing down on everyone to the point of suffocation. I understood that the 3 days that Jean Canwin mentioned was just a general concept. There was no difference between waking up a day earlier or a day later. However, the anxiety he had accumulated over the past few days had completely exploded on the last day. His heart just couldn't calm down. Seeing that I didn't want to talk, Jean Canwin didn't say anything else. He remained silent like me. Sometimes he would look at the fat guy and sometimes he would look at the lights in the distance. The room was so quiet that only the 3 of us could hear our breathing. As the sky gradually darkened, the antique town downstairs entered the busiest time of the day again. It was bustling with noise and excitement. Some people laughed and squeezed into the crowd, while others stood where they were and called their friends. As I listened to their voices, I felt increasingly lonely and pressured. I don't have many friends and even fewer relatives. To me, Fatty is both a friend and a relative. Now that I don't know if he's alive or dead, how can I remain calm? I thought of the heavenly Tao again. Previously, the so-called heavenly Tao had already detained my wife. This time, it's the same thing that injured my brother. Regardless of whether Fatty could wake up or not, the grudge between me and the heavenly Tao had increased. In the midst of my uneasiness and hatred, the night sky couldn't be stopped anymore. The room was dark. Jean Canwin stood up and prepared to turn on the lights. The light and slow footsteps sounded especially ear-piercing in the extremely quiet room at this time. Suddenly, other than the breathing of the 3 of us and Jean Canwin's footsteps, there was another sound in the room. *T, why am I blind? It's Fatty. The moment I heard the voice, I confirmed that it was Fatty. I quickly stood up from the bed and ran to Fatty's side in the dark. Hearing Fatty's voice, Jean Canwen's movements sped up. Following a crisp paw, the room suddenly lit up at the same time I reached the side of the bed. Fatty had been unconscious for many days. Suddenly coming into contact with such strong light, his pupils dilated and he exclaimed, "It's so bright. Where is this place?" Fatty's voice was weak, but his tone was the same as usual. He laid on the bed and grabbed the blanket on top of him, hiding his head under it. The entire movement was done in one go. Seeing him like that, my worried heart finally calmed down. Just then, Jean Canwen rushed over from the door and looked at Fatty with me. After a while, Fatty quietly put down the blanket. After confirming that Jean Canwen and I were standing next to the bed, he lifted the blanket and jumped up from the bed. He hugged my neck with one hand and Jean Canwen with the other. He shouted happily, "Third baby, old Jean, I thought I would never see you again. It's great that I'm still alive." Jean Canwen and I weren't prepared yet, so we were suddenly hugged by the fat man. We almost lost our balance and fell down. However, the fat man's action had undeniably resolved the haze that Jean Canwen and I had been feeling for the past few days. All right. Now that you've just woken up, you should lie down first. Are you hungry? I'll go and get you something to eat." Jean Canwen patted Fatty's back and said. Fatty hadn't eaten for 3 days, so he was probably very hungry. After hearing the suggestion, he naturally agreed happily. After saying okay 3 times, he obediently lay back on the bed. Jean Canwen hurriedly left, and soon returned with a small bowl of porridge that he had prepared. Xie Chenghua, Lu Chuanda and the others also came with him. When they arrived at Fatty's bedside, they kept asking him how he was feeling. It was obvious that Fatty's sleep for the past few days had not only affected Jean Canwen and my mood, but also the mood of the entire store. Now that Fatty had woken up, everyone's smile reappeared on their faces. Unexpectedly receiving so much concern, Fatty sat on the bed and smiled foolishly, continuously thanking everyone. After a long time, after everyone confirmed that Fatty was fine, they left one by one. Only Jean Canwen and I were left in the room. After watching everyone leave, Fatty finally heaved a long sigh of relief. Without any hesitation, he ordered Jean Canwen and me, "Quick, help me up. I'm starving." His body was weak, so Jean Canwen and I helped him up from the bed to the dining table. When Fatty saw the food on the table, he immediately wailed, "Third baby, old Jean, you guys are too crazy. Just 2 bowls of porridge. I'm so weak right now, you can't treat me like this. I want to eat meat." 2 bowls of porridge and a few side dishes. For someone like Fatty who couldn't live without meat, it was indeed a bit dismal. Jean Canwen and I took turns to comfort him, telling him that he had just woken up, so it wasn't good to eat greasy food. He needed to rest for a while. At first, Fatty refuted us, saying that his body was good, so he didn't need to rest. He just needed to eat a lot of meat, and the meatier the better. However, seeing that Jean Canwen and I didn't allow him to refuse, he finally accepted his fate and ate the 2 bowls of porridge with a bitter face. This guy really seemed to be starving. At first, he said that he didn't want to eat, but in the end, he didn't even have a drop of porridge left. Seeing that he had finished eating, Jean Canwen and I helped him back to the bed and asked him about his current situation. I asked him, "Fatty, do you feel like there's anything wrong with your body?" Fatty looked at me suspiciously, then at Jean Canwen. Then, he pinched his body and closed his eyes to feel for a while. Nodding, he said, There shouldn't be any problem. Besides feeling a little weak, my body feels quite comfortable." Hearing that, the last stone in my heart was lifted, and I heaved a long sigh of relief. It was good that Fatty was fine. My worries for the past few days weren't in vain. Just as I heaved a sigh of relief, Fatty's expression suddenly changed. He shouted, "Something's wrong. What's going on? Where's my Tao energy? Third baby, I can't feel my Tao energy." "What?" Jean Canwen and I had just recovered, but our expressions changed again. Chapter 668. My face darkened. For cultivators, cultivation wasn't inferior to life. How many people had devoted decades of their lives to cultivation? A person's cultivation represented not only power, but also decades of hard work. Losing one's cultivation was equivalent to wasting decades of time. Who could bear it? Just like me back then, after my cultivation was crippled, I was depressed for several months. At that time, I even had the will to die. In the end, it was thanks to Yi Piampian's care and the miraculous true dragon saliva that I recovered. I didn't dare to imagine what would happen if the fatty found out that his cultivation was destroyed. After listening to the fatty, not only me, but even Jean Canwen couldn't help but look worried. In the past 2 days, the two of us had checked the fatty's body condition countless times. However, we focused on his health and didn't pay much attention to his cultivation. So far, we haven't found any problems with his cultivation. Jean Canwen and I sat next to the fatty, each holding one of his hands. Through the connection between our arms, we channeled our true essence into the fatty's body and began to check the fatty's veins of the heavens. There was nothing wrong with the fatty's body. His veins of the heavens were unobstructed, but just as the fatty had said, there was no trace of Tao Qi in his veins of the heavens. Although the realms of divination and geomancy masters were different, their fundamental cultivation was the same. They were both Tao Qi. With Jean Canwen's and my cultivation, as long as there was a trace of Tao Qi in the fatty's body, it wouldn't be able to escape our check. However, after checking several times, there was nothing. Jean Canwen and I looked at each other, our eyes filled with deep worry. The fatty allowed Jean Canwen and me to check his body. After noticing our gazes, he sighed and said dejectedly, "If it's gone, then it's gone. These years, I've seen so many magical places and encountered so many miraculous things. It's not a waste. However, I'm afraid I won't be able to help you save Lao Ai or Yi Piampian in the future. Third baby you." I looked at the fatty and interrupted him. "It's okay, fatty. Don't think too much." After saying that, I didn't care about the fatty's reaction. With the last bit of hope, I channeled my true essence into his dantian to check. The dantian was the foundation of a cultivator. Whether it was the Tao Qi of the Earth Master Realm or the true essence of the Celestial Master Realm, they all gathered there through the veins of the heavens. However, the dantian itself was very fragile. Therefore, cultivators wouldn't let anyone else check their dantian. If the person spying on him had ulterior motives or was slightly careless, then there would only be one result for the person being spied on, and that was to have his dantian crippled, and he would never be able to cultivate again. I knew what would happen if I didn't control my true essence well. The fatty knew it, and Jean Canwen also knew it. But now, this was the only way to test if the fatty's Tao Qi was still there. Because of this, the fatty didn't stop my actions, and just gently turned his head to the side, no longer looking at me. Jean Canwen also didn't stop my actions, and only withdrew his true essence from the fatty's body. He did this to protect the fatty, and also to avoid disturbing my probing. I took a deep breath and circulated my true essence through the veins of the heavens. Soon, it reached the fatty's dantian. He went deeper into his dantian, but he did not sense any reaction from the qi of the way. He probed a little deeper, but still couldn't sense anything. 3 points was still the same. The dantian had a total of 9 parts. The first 3 parts were known as the upper dantian. Things like the Tao energy brilliant stars of the earthly master realm were mostly stored in the upper dantian. The middle 3 parts are called the middle dantian. In the middle dantian, it stores the true essence and seal of the celestial master realm. This is the same for me and Jean Canwen. When Fatty was in Wangu Grotto Heaven, his cultivation was at the peak of Shurmao. He was only 1 step away from entering the celestial master realm, becoming the first person in the Zhanyan sect to enter the celestial master realm in 100 years. However, in the end, he was unable to cross the threshold between heavenly master and earthly master to become a heavenly master. Therefore, his Dao Qi should be in his upper dantian. Now that the exploration of the 3 dantians had been completed, there was no trace of Dao Qi. This meant that the fatty's cultivation had most likely completely disappeared. I grimaced, but the fatty seemed to have recovered from the shock. He asked me calmly, "Third baby, how's the situation?" I didn't want to hide it from the fatty. After a moment of silence, I told him the truth. There's no trace of Dao Qi in the upper dantian. Hearing what I said, the fatty smiled as if he had been freed and didn't say anything. Zhang Kanwen, who was at the side, suddenly frowned and said to me, "There's no Dao Qi in the upper dantian, but it doesn't mean that the cultivation has disappeared. Maybe the fatty benefited from the disaster and advanced to the celestial master realm like me?" Before I said anything, the fatty smiled bitterly. "The heavenly punishment isn't a good bird. It's good enough that it didn't kill me. How could it be a blessing?" Although he rejected me, I was moved. What Zhang Kanwen said was indeed possible, but it wasn't a blessing from the disaster. The fatty had told me before that in order to enter the celestial master realm, not only did one have to have sufficient cultivation, but they also had to detect a major event that was related to the fate of the world. Only then could one become a celestial master. Although the fatty's Zhanlu didn't sound like a major event that was related to the fate of the world, it had attracted the heavenly punishment. Maybe the fatty had used this opportunity to successfully advance to the celestial master realm? After a cultivator stepped into the celestial master realm, their Dao Qi would be converted into true essence and stored in the middle dantian. Under such circumstances, there wouldn't be any Dao Qi in the upper dantian. I looked at the fatty. Although his expression was calm, as a close friend that had grown up together, how could I not know the despair in the fatty's heart? Seeing this, I gritted my teeth and sent my true essence into the fatty's middle dantian. I'll treat a hopeless situation as a last resort. Compared to the upper dantian, the middle dantian was much weaker. Hence, before entering the middle dantian, I had purposely weakened my true essence, afraid that I would hurt the fatty if I wasn't careful. I carefully controlled a wisp of true essence and sent it into the fatty's middle dantian. Just as I was about to move forward, a soft force suddenly appeared in the fatty's middle dantian and sent my true essence out. I frowned. What was going on? If the fatty's cultivation had really been erased by the heavenly punishment, then there shouldn't be anyone in his dantian. Even if my wisp of true essence was much weaker, it wasn't something that a normal person without cultivation could fight against. For there to be such power in the fatty's middle dantian, there seemed to be a chance. Just as I was about to gather true essence again and send it into the fatty's middle dantian, I saw that the fatty was frowning, as if he was in great pain. The dantian was very weak. Although I controlled my true essence very lightly, it would still bring great discomfort to the fatty. I took a deep breath and said to the fatty, "Bear with it. I'll try one more time. No matter what the result is, I'll withdraw my true essence. Is that all right?" "All right." The fatty wasn't as talkative as he usually was. He just nodded. "Bear with it," I thought, and gathered true essence again, sending it into the fatty's middle dantian. With the previous experience, this time, I wasn't as blind as before. I condensed a bit more true essence. I didn't hope to break through the obstruction of that power, I just wanted to stay in the fatty's dantian for a second longer. In just 1 second, I could clearly feel the situation in the fatty's middle dantian. I controlled my true essence and carefully approached the fatty's dantian. After smoothly breaking through the upper dantian, I stopped at the intersection of the upper dantian and middle dantian. Then, I gritted my teeth and sent my true essence in. It was the same situation as before. Just as my true essence entered the fatty's middle dantian, that gentle power welcomed it. It was like a wave, slowly washing me. The last time was too short, so I couldn't identify what this power was. But this time I could feel it. Could this be true essence? If this was true essence, why couldn't the fatty feel it? Why could it only move in the middle dantian and not enter the upper dantian? There was only 1 second. Although the energy in the fatty's body was as gentle as a wave, it kept rejecting my true essence. So, the time I could use to investigate the situation was less than 1 second. Time was tight, so I didn't think too much and directly released my true essence. Just as I released my true essence, I found a huge mass of qi in the fatty's middle dantian. It was a mass of true essence that appeared after Tao Qi had turned into true essence. This meant that the fatty had indeed advanced to Sky Master. But very quickly, I found that the true essence mass was covered in a layer of golden membrane. Moreover, that golden membrane was emitting a shocking power. That was the power of the way of heaven. I couldn't be more familiar with this power. 3 days ago, Zhang Kanwen and I had come into contact with it. Thanks to it, Zhang Kanwen had entered the Sky Master realm, and my cultivation had also advanced. 1 second passed in the blink of an eye. Just as I understood what that power was, the fatty's true essence pushed my true essence to the barrier between the upper dantian and middle dantian. Here, the power of the way of heaven in the fatty's true essence was even more obvious. It seemed to be attached to the barrier, imprisoning the fatty's true essence. In an instant, my true essence collided with the power of the way of heaven and disappeared. At the same time, I opened my eyes. Chapter 669. After I opened my eyes, I exhaled. Then, I looked at the fatty and Zhang Kanwen and told them my guess. Just as I thought, the fatty didn't become a celestial master by absorbing the power of God's punishment. Instead, it was because of what had happened during the Zhan Xielu battle. He followed the Zhan Xielu's advancement method and became the first person in the Zhan Xielu faction to become a celestial master. However, it was precisely because of this trial that the fatty was punished by the heavenly way. As such, not only did the heavenly way injure the fatty, but it also left its power in the fatty's dantian, sealing the qi of the way that had just transformed into true origin energy. Hence, the fatty was unable to sense his own Tao Qi. The current situation was that the fatty had already become a heaven's master, but his cultivation was sealed. If he wanted to use his power, he had to break through the heavens' restriction. After I said that, the fatty's confusion instantly disappeared. He asked me excitedly, "So, I'm already a heaven's master?" After I nodded, the fatty laughed loudly. "I knew it. Third baby, you've already become a heaven's master. It won't be long before I become a heaven's master too. I didn't expect, haha. I didn't expect that after just one divination, I would become the heaven's master that so many people yearn for. I Lin Hu am really a genius. Ha ha. Although Zhang Kanwen didn't know about the martial arts competition between Lu Zhenyang and me, he had participated in Fatty's coma from start to finish. Furthermore, he had checked Fatty's body's condition. Towards my words, he naturally believed them. However, after hearing my words, he didn't rejoice and instead furrowed his eyebrows. I knew what he was worried about, because I was extremely worried as well. On the surface, not only did the sky's punishment not cause us any harm, it even allowed Zhang Kanwen and me to absorb the power of the heavens. We gained many benefits, and Zhang Kanwen even advanced to become a heaven's master. However, in actual fact, the reason why I could use the power of the heavens was because of the Heaven's Master Seal. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been possible. Zhang Kanwen, on the other hand, was able to use the power of the heavens to break through to the Heaven's Master realm because of Wen Shan's inheritance. The only exception was the fatty. He was completely powerless against the heavenly punishment, which resulted in him being seriously injured. Now that his cultivation base was sealed, it would be extremely difficult for him to break through the seal. Breaking through to the Heavenly Master realm was naturally a good thing, but because of this seal, Fatty could not use the power of a Heavenly Master even though he had the cultivation of a Heavenly Master. The situation he was facing now was even more embarrassing than having his cultivation destroyed. Although Fatty had always been an optimist and was currently immersed in the excitement of breaking through to the Celestial Master realm, he would soon discover this problem. When that time came, he would probably not be able to laugh anymore. Jean Canwan and I exchanged glances. At that moment, we didn't know how to remind the Fatty. It had to be said that the Fatty really had a big heart. After laughing foolishly for a while, he didn't notice that my and Jean Canwan's expressions weren't right. Instead, he laughed and asked me, "That's right, third baby, you said that I was injured by the power of the heavens because I was trying to verify the matter of chasing the deer. Why can't I remember anything about it? Do you know what I found at that time?" Of course, I know what he found. Encountering the yang brings danger, seeking the yin brings protection. There were a total of 8 words. Hearing him ask about this, I turned to look at Jean Canwan and shook my head slightly to signal him not to speak. Then, I turned to the Fatty and said, "How would I know the result of your divination? When we received your message and rushed over, we found you unconscious on the ground. After that, we saved you from the god's punishment and took care of you for 3 days without rest. You only woke up today. I was about to ask you what exactly you found." I naturally didn't want to lie to the Fatty on purpose. It was just that the heavens didn't hesitate to send down divine punishment to erase the Fatty's divination result. From this, it could be seen that there was definitely a huge secret hidden in those 8 words. Hence, I didn't dare to tell the Fatty about this result. If the god's punishment were to descend again, Jean Canwan and I would still be able to deal with it. However, it would be hard to say for the Fatty's situation. Jean Canwan and I could take care of him for a while, but there would always be a time when we couldn't. Hence, it was better to hide it from him for now. Seeing me like this, Jean Canwan also reacted quickly and nodded his head. The Fatty looked confused. He rubbed his head and said dejectedly, "I vaguely remember that I seemed to have divined something. It seemed to be something very important to you, third baby. I was anxious to tell you, but then I fainted. King God's punishment, why can't I remember?" After being troubled for a while, he turned to look at me and said solemnly, "But don't worry, third baby. I'll definitely try to recall it in the next 2 days. If I really can't remember, I'll wait for a few days after my body has fully recovered, then I'll try again. I don't believe that King God's punishment can stop me once, but it can stop me a second time." Hearing his words, I jumped in shock. I wanted to persuade him not to do so, but before I could speak, I remembered that the Fatty couldn't use any of his cultivation. If he wanted to try again, he would have to solve the matter of the god's punishment seal in his body first. Thus, I heaved a sigh of relief and smiled at the Fatty. Divining is just a supplementary method. Regardless of whether we can succeed or not, we have to go to Julu. When the time comes, we'll deal with whatever comes our way. We'll just do our best. You don't have to worry too much about this. At this moment, the Fatty probably remembered that he couldn't use his cultivation for the time being. He could only nod dejectedly. "That's all we can do then. But I have a feeling that this trip to Julu won't be that dangerous. Look at that ugly Lu Jinyang. It's been so many years, and he hasn't gotten any benefits from you. I reckon it'll be the same this time. Even if there's an accident, I, the Fat Lord, have always been a good person. I'll definitely protect you." After he finished boasting shamelessly, he reached out and patted my shoulder. It seemed that he was protecting me. I smiled. I understood that the Fatty was consoling me. However, I was thinking about something else in my heart. Previously, when I asked the Fatty to go with me to Julu, I thought that we could obtain the monster refining gourd. It would be enough to save our lives. After that, we also obtained the heaven measuring ruler, so we had another life. Originally, the situation was great. Even if we couldn't get any benefits from Lu Xingyang, we wouldn't be at a disadvantage. However, after the incident with Tian Fa, the fatty's cultivation had been sealed. No matter if it was the monster refining gourd or the heaven measuring ruler, they would be temporarily unable to be used. Since it was related to the monster refining gourd and the second volume of the death scripture, I had to go to Zhulu. However, from the current situation, it was better to go alone than to bring the fatty along. However, I didn't know how to tell the fatty. With his personality, he most likely wouldn't agree. Moreover, it would provoke the fatty and make him realize that he had temporarily become a mortal. I didn't say anything, but the fatty had already started to guess the situation on Lu Xingyang's side. He asked me, "I don't know if the ox-nosed Taoists from Mount Longhu have found Lu Xingyang. Perhaps by the time we go to Zhulu, Lu Xingyang would have already been killed by the people from Mount Longhu." After all, Mount Longhu had 2,000 years of history. Celestial Master Zhang's power was extraordinary. No matter how powerful Lu Xingyang was, he couldn't be compared to Celestial Master Zhang. Of course, I also hoped that Lu Xingyang would be killed. However, I understood that the current Celestial Master Zhang wouldn't easily make a move. Moreover, the other people from Mount Longhu wouldn't be Lu Xingyang's match. Even if the two sides encountered each other, the chances of Lu Xingyang being killed would be minuscule. At this moment, the fatty was still immersed in the joy of becoming a heavenly master. He bluntly said that he hoped that Lu Xingyang would quickly tell us his specific address so that we could meet up as soon as possible. Now that he was also a heavenly master, he really wanted to use his heavenly master realm formations to meet Lu Xingyang. Not to mention the fact that the fatty had just become a heavenly master and that his cultivation was sealed. Even if he had the cultivation of a peak heavenly master and the monster refining gourd, he most likely wouldn't be Lu Xingyang's match. I knew that the fatty was just joking around, so I didn't say anything and just smiled at him. The room quickly quieted down. Chapter 670. Previously, when we were preparing to return from Wanwu Grotto Heaven and discussed this matter with Lu Xingyang, we agreed that it would be a month. During this time, Fatty and I went back to our hometown, then went to Fire God Temple to see Tao Wu, and then hurried back to deal with little Wang Li's matter. Finally, it was Fatty's matter in the past 2 days. After careful calculation, more than half a month had passed. There were only about 5 days left before the agreed 1-month period. So, I said to Zhang Canwen, "About 5 days." Zhang Canwen looked at Fatty and I and sighed, "That's only a few days. I haven't had much contact with Lu Xingyang, but from what you said, I can roughly tell that he's not only powerful, but also very cunning. Not only is this person powerful, but he is also very cunning. You must be careful this time. Speaking of which, I should go with you, but the matter with Wang Li is really—" I shook my head with a smile and said to Zhang Canwen, "Big brother Zhang, don't worry. It's not the first time I've fought with Lu Xingyang. Nothing happened before, and nothing will happen this time. You can rest assured. Take good care of little Wang Li and wait for me and Fatty to come back." After saying that, I patted his shoulder. Fatty had been punished by God because of the Zhulu incident. I didn't need Zhang Canwen to tell me that in his eyes, the trip to Zhulu was obviously a trap. Knowing that it was a trap, Zhang Canwen naturally couldn't do such a thing and watch Fatty and I jump into it. I could imagine that if there was no little Wang Li, he would definitely follow me like Wang Can. I knew what he was planning, but from my point of view, I didn't want him to go with me. My relationship with Lu Xingyang had already involved too many people. I had just refused Officer Wang. Now, if I dragged Zhang Canwen into this, it would be unreasonable. Moreover, the things that Zhang Canwen was carrying were no less than Wang Can. As the three of us chatted, the moon was already high up in the sky. Fatty had slept for 3 days in one go, so he was very energetic. Naturally, he didn't want to sleep for a while. He pulled me and Jean Canwan and asked about the things that had happened while he was unconscious. They chatted until dawn. Because his body had not fully recovered, Fatty finally felt a little tired and fell into a deep sleep. Seeing that the Fatty had fallen asleep, Jean Can and I quietly left the room and returned to our own rooms to rest. After 3 days, the damaged room had naturally been repaired. Furthermore, I was exhausted from the past few days. After returning to my room, my spirit was also slightly exhausted. However, I couldn't fall asleep as I lay on the bed. The Fatty was currently in a state of excitement and did not realize that his true essence had been sealed by the power of the heavens. However, once he woke up, he would definitely not be so optimistic. The bigger problem was the upcoming trip to Julu. If there was still a lot of time before the deer-chasing mountain, it would be fine. But since we were about to set off for the deer-chasing mountain, the Fatty wouldn't be able to use his cultivation. Even I would have to face great danger. Although I wasn't afraid of Lu Jinyang, there was no reason for me to take the initiative to throw my life away. Therefore, Fatty's matter had to be resolved as soon as possible. Otherwise, the situation would be unimaginable. After lying on the bed and thinking for a whole night, I came up with 2 solutions in my head. The first method was to use the power of my Celestial Master Seal to enter Fatty's Dantian and consume the power of the heavenly punishment. That way, I would be able to remove the seal in Fatty's body. This was the fastest and most effective method. However, at the same time, it was also the most dangerous method. The Dantian was already weak. Previously, I had only used a small amount of true essence to enter Fatty's Dantian, and it had already caused him to grit his teeth and frown. The Celestial Master Seal was the foundation of a Celestial Master's cultivation. The power contained within it could be said to be incomparably ferocious. My forward Celestial Master Seal was even more so. If I really sent my Celestial Master Seal into Fatty's Dantian, the pain that he would have to face would increase by more than 10 times. If I was the slightest bit careless, not only would my Dantian be destroyed, I might even end up harming Fatty's life. Furthermore, since ancient times, I had never heard of anyone sending their Celestial Master Seal into someone else's Dantian. So, after thinking of this method, I decisively gave up on it after some consideration. Compared to cultivation, Fatty's life was more important. If I had to use this method to remove the seal on Fatty's body, I would rather he carry the seal with him forever. It was better to be immortal than to lose his life. This method was too dangerous, but fortunately, it was not the only way to remove the seal. A few days ago, when we were facing the power of the heavenly punishment, Zhang Canwen had used the secret method of Wenshan to absorb the power of the heavenly punishment together with me. In the end, he had even used the power of the heavenly punishment to break through to the Celestial Master realm. From this, it could be seen that the secret method that Zhang Canwen had used at that time would definitely have an effect on the power of the heavenly punishment. If he could impart this method to Fatty, not only would it allow Fatty to remove the power of the seal, but it would also allow Fatty to use the power of the seal to increase his own cultivation. Wouldn't that be the best of both worlds? However, although this method was feasible and effective, and would not be dangerous at all, the problem was that this secret method was related to the inheritance of Wenshan. Although Zhang Canwen treated us as his family, when it came to matters of inheritance, I had no confidence. Inheritance was the foundation of a person's life. Back then, the reason why the Wenshan lineage had made such a name for themselves in Mei Mountain wasn't only because of Lord Zhao's character, but also because of the secret techniques passed down by the Wenshan lineage. It was also because of these secret methods that Zhang Canwen's uncle, Zhang Canwen, and his 2 disciples had turned against each other in the end. Now, Wenshan's people had withered to the extreme, and only Zhang Canwen was left. The only thing they could rely on were these secret methods. If Zhang Canwen also spread these secret arts, then who knew what else Wenshan's lineage would have left? Furthermore, the person who needed the secret methods was Fatty. Given my friendship with Zhang Canwen, if I were the one who needed the secret methods, Zhang Canwen would most likely agree without hesitation. However, his friendship with Fatty hadn't reached that stage yet. In fact, I felt sorry for Zhang Canwen. At this time, the heavy burden of Wenshan was on his shoulders. If he took a wrong step, he would be consigned to eternal damnation. That was why I didn't want to trouble him. However, the problem was that time was tight. Apart from this, I couldn't think of any other way. I could either make things difficult for him or myself. No matter which choice I made, it would be very difficult for me. I sat in my room and pondered for a long time. In the end, I decided to ask Zhang Canwen. Regardless of whether Zhang Canwen agreed or not, after this, I would promise myself that I would help Zhang Canwen and Wenshan for the rest of my life. I would also share a part of the responsibility on his shoulders. It could be considered as making up for the trouble I'd caused him. After making up my mind, I didn't hesitate anymore and went to Zhang Canwen's room. At this time, Zhang Canwen had already woken up and was sitting in meditation to stabilize his heavenly master realm. Since I had a lot on my mind, I didn't bother with pleasantries and directly told him what I wanted to say. I thought that I would make things difficult for Zhang Canwen, but I didn't expect that after listening to me, he would agree without hesitation. It would have been fine if he had refused, but agreeing would have made me feel even more guilty. After a moment of silence, I cupped my hands at him and said solemnly, "Big brother Zhang, I know that it's too much to ask you to impart your sect's secret method to someone else, but I don't have any other choice this time. I can't thank you enough for your kindness. From now on, Wenshan's matters will be my matters." Seeing how solemn I was, Zhang Canwen hastily waved his hand and said to me with a wry smile, Don't. You've misunderstood. Although this devouring method is miraculous, it's not an inherited secret method of Wenshan's. It's a hand seal that I obtained by chance from somewhere else. It has nothing to do with our lineage's inheritance. You don't have to worry. This secret method to devour the power of heavenly punishment isn't an inheritance of Wenshan's lineage. Chapter 671. On the path of cultivation, in addition to talent and willpower, opportunities were also very important. Some people couldn't cross the threshold of drawing qi into threads their entire lives, while others could rely on their own opportunities to obtain the inheritance of their ancestors and have a smooth journey on the path of cultivation. Previously, in the blessed enclave, sheath edge and armor stripping were bestowed with dual swords by the heavens. Li Yuyuan and Hu Yurong, whom Zhao Hao had found, had also relied on opportunities and inheritances to become famous. Even for me, if it wasn't for Bai and giving me the death scripture by chance, I'm afraid I would still be a mediocre mortal. Therefore, when Zhang Canwen said that he had accidentally obtained the inheritance of this hand seal technique from somewhere else, I didn't doubt it and quickly accepted his explanation. After settling this matter, I left Zhang Canwen's room and went to find the fatty. In the end, the fatty slept until the afternoon and still hadn't woken up. I stood next to his bed and called him for a long time. Although I managed to wake him up, I let him continue to rest when I saw his sleepy face. While he was sleeping, I had nothing to do, so I went to see little Wang Li. I had been busy with the fatty's matters for the past few days, so I hadn't paid attention to little Wang Li. I didn't know how he was doing. When I arrived at little Wang Li's room, Zhang Canwen was already there. He was combing little Wang Li's meridians. Unlike me, Zhang Canwen was little Wang Li's master, so he was much more attentive to the little guy than I was. Every day, no matter what, he would come over to check little Wang Li's body and comb his meridians, rain or shine. After breaking through to the heavenly master realm, Zhang Canwen was much more energetic than before, and he looked like a new person. Today, he had shaved his beard clean and was wearing a green robe. Looking at the way he took out the Heavenly Master seal to comb little Wang Li's meridians, he really looked like an immortal. Because of his Heavenly Master cultivation base, the power that Zhang Kanwen could use was much stronger than before. The combing process, which originally took an hour to complete, was now shortened by more than half. After a while, he finished the whole process and put away the Heavenly Master seal. Seeing him stop, I walked forward and picked up little Wang Li. When Zhang Kanwen saw me, he exhaled deeply. Although it was not difficult for him to sort out little Wang Li's meridians at the Heavenly Master realm, Zhang Kanwen's expression was not very good. He was frowning, obviously still worried about little Wang Li's condition. I lifted little Wang Li's shirt. The little fellow's chest was still sunken in like before. A wisp of black smoke lingered in it with a faint evil aura. Compared to a few days ago, this evil aura seemed to have grown a lot. It was no wonder that Zhang Kanwen sighed. Although little Wang Li was fine for the time being, his condition could still worsen. It would be difficult for him to hold on for too long. No one knew when the next relapse would come. When I recalled the power of the ghostly face covered in black smoke, my face turned gloomy. Zhang Kanwen looked at me and shook his head. His condition hasn't improved. Although I have the cultivation of a Heavenly Master, I tried it just now, but it didn't work. I can only nurse his body every day to make the little fella feel better. Once the thing in the pit went crazy, I wouldn't be able to suppress it for long. We need to come up with a plan for this matter. I nodded and thought for a moment. When I come back, I'll think of a way to find someone. As long as I can find that person, there should be some progress. When I had suppressed the evil aura on little Wang Li, I had inexplicably associated it with the sacrificial evil spirit. At that time, I didn't know why, but I felt that the evil aura on little Wang Li might be useful after seeing it. But in the past few days, according to my observation, I gradually found that the evil aura on little Wang Li's body seemed to be somewhat similar to the aura of the sacrificial evil spirit. Although I didn't know why, as long as I found the sacrificial evil spirit and asked him to check on little Wang Li's condition, there would definitely be a turn for the better. With that thought in mind, I made up my mind. After we returned from Zhulu, the first thing we would do was to find the sacrificial evil spirit and try to get rid of the time bomb tied to little Wang Li. Hearing that, Zhang Kanwen was slightly stunned, but he didn't ask much. He just nodded and heaved a sigh of relief. After talking about this, Zhang Kanwen and I sat in little Wang Li's room for a while. After Wang Kun called us to have dinner together, we went to the fatty's room together. The fatty was still sleeping, but this time, I gently pushed him and he opened his eyes. It was obvious that he had slept well. He didn't look drowsy like before, and he jumped up from the bed. He looked like a dragon and a tiger, and it was impossible to tell that he had just been seriously injured. Seeing that he was fine, I also heaved a sigh of relief. I exchanged glances with Zhang Kanwen and walked to the bedside. Each of us stretched out a hand and pressed the fatty down. The fatty was dumbfounded and asked curiously, "What are you doing?" Previously, because we couldn't think of a way to solve the fatty's true essence seal, we deliberately didn't remind him. Now that we had a solution, we didn't hide it anymore and told him about the matter of his true essence being sealed. Fatty wasn't completely heartless. At this time, he had also thought through this matter. After listening to me, he pursed his lips and said, "I noticed this a long time ago, but it's fine as long as I advance to the Sky Master rank." That seal, to put it bluntly, is actually similar to a formation. After I go back and study it for a few days, I'll definitely solve the seal. He was confident, but even if he could really solve the seal, he didn't know how long it would take. Moreover, the trip to Zhuolu was imminent. There was no time for him to slowly solve it. Before I spoke, Zhang Kanwen smiled and said, "It's best if you can solve the seal yourself. However, as long as the seal isn't broken, you won't be able to use your power. I have a hand seal technique here that can absorb the power of the sky punishment." I wonder. What? When the fatty heard that, he immediately stopped bragging and grinned. He said to Zhang Canwen, "Big brother Zhang, you're really a selfless lei feng. How do I practice this hand seal? Can you teach it to me now?" This fellow was really shameless. Previously, he had bragged so much, but when he heard that Zhang Canwen had a solution, he immediately changed his attitude. Zhang Canwen was going to impart the hand seal technique to him anyway, so he naturally wouldn't be bothered by it and quickly nodded in agreement. When the fatty heard that, he was so excited that he didn't even care about his meal. He clamored for Zhang Canwen to impart the hand seal technique to him immediately. This fellow was really like a human. He even said that after he solved the seal, he would first help Zhang Canwen read his fortune to tell his marriage fate. He even said that if Wen Shan's lineage wanted to flourish, it wasn't enough to just rely on taking in disciples. He had to have a few more himself. Zhang Canwen's face flushed red when he heard that, and he almost wanted to quit. Even I couldn't help but laugh at the side. After fooling around for a while, the fatty went to eat first before returning to his room to sit down. Zhang Canwen was prepared to impart the hand seal technique to him. Seeing that they were about to start, I prepared to stand up and leave. Although the hand seal that could devour the power of the heavens wasn't an inherited technique from Zhang Canwen's lineage, it was still extremely important. If I stayed here to listen, I would inevitably be suspected of stealing his teachings. However, just as I stood up, Zhang Canwen stopped me and said, "This devouring soul hand seal isn't a secret. You don't need to be an outsider. Previously, when you were fighting against the sky's punishment, I saw that you used the seal to devour the sky's punishment. I think that your seal should have the power to devour. However, you're still unfamiliar with it. Stay here and study the devouring soul hand seal. Perhaps you'll be able to comprehend it by analogy and gain more control over the devouring power." Zhang Canwen spoke sincerely. When the fatty heard that the hand seal would be beneficial to me, he and Zhang Canwen urged him to stay. This time, I couldn't refuse, so I could only stay. Zhang Canwen was right. I really didn't know how to use the seal's devouring power. Whether it was absorbing the power of the celestial master seals from Mount Longhu or absorbing the power of the sky's punishment, they were all passive. The devouring power was stimulated, and I still couldn't control it. If Zhang Canwen's devouring soul hand seal could really help me solve this problem, my power would definitely increase. Seeing that I stayed, Zhang Canwen and the fatty smiled knowingly. They didn't say anything else and started to impart the devouring soul hand seal. As I watched Zhang Canwen practice the hand seal, I didn't think much of it at first. However, as I continued to impart more knowledge, I gradually felt that something was wrong. In the past few years, I had seen many of the techniques of Mount Wen's lineage. I had even personally used their treasure, the Yin-Yang Yama brush. Therefore, I was very familiar with the aura of Mount Wen's lineage. Moreover, the aura of Mount Wen's lineage was very heavy in this hand seal. After realizing this, I felt somewhat uncomfortable. However, since Zhang Canwen had already said it, I couldn't say anything else. I would be letting down his good intentions. Chapter 672. 5 days passed in the blink of an eye. In the past 5 days, the fatty and I had been concentrating on practicing Zhang Canwen's soul-devouring handprint. I had to admit that the lineage of Mount Wen was mystical. Just the soul-devouring handprint alone made me realize this point. With the soul-devouring handprint, not only did it increase my understanding of the power of devouring, it also improved my control of the celestial master seal. More importantly, I could now actively use the seal's power of devouring. This undoubtedly increased my power greatly. I was immersed in the mysteriousness of the soul-devouring handprint, while the fatty placed all his hopes of breaking the seal on the handprint. In the past 5 days, he had once again sunk into a frenzied state where he didn't step out of his house. His hard work wasn't in vain. On the second day after learning the handprint from Zhang Canwen, He told me that he felt the presence of true essence. After 5 days of hard work, he had dissolved more than half of the seal on the power of sky punishment. This once again overturned my understanding of the lineage of Mount One. I originally thought that even though the soul-devouring handprint was mystical, it wasn't worth mentioning compared to the power of sky punishment. Even if he could break the seal, he would need at least 10 days of effort. It would already be good for the fatty to use a little bit of his power before the deer-chasing expedition. I didn't expect that in less than 5 days, the seal in the fatty's body had already been dissolved by half. He could even use 30 to 40% of his cultivation. As he had already reached the celestial master realm, 30 to 40% of his cultivation wasn't much different from the complete glory of knowledge. Thus, for the past 2 days, the fatty's face was filled with joy and didn't look as distressed as before. Looking at the situation, the seal in the fatty's body would be completely dissolved in another 10 to 15 days. Furthermore, due to the soul-devouring handprint having the power of devouring, it was highly possible that the fatty would be able to form the celestial master seal after devouring the power of sky punishment. Thinking about that, I started to look forward to the words on the fatty's seal. From the fatty's actions, if his seal had 4 words, I reckoned that it would be born to be a foodie. On the day that I had agreed to meet with Lu Zhenyang, I had just opened my eyes. Before I even got out of bed, a wave of heat was emitted from the sound-transmitting talisman in my bosom. It's here. I took out the sound-transmitting talisman. Sure enough, it was Lu Zhenyang's sound-transmitting talisman. I revolved my true essence and the light screen of the sound-transmitting talisman surged out. As the sinister aura around Lu Zhenyang's body became denser, 2 lines of words appeared in front of me. 2 days later, Tower Village. Ever since Lu Zhenyang came out of the mausoleum of the Shang dynasty, his entire temperament had undergone an earth-shaking change. He had changed from the arrogant young master of a rich family to a cold, gloomy, and iron-masked man who treasured his words like gold. If he could explain it in 1 word, he wouldn't say it twice. Looking at the words slowly vanishing in front of me, I suddenly calmed down. He had already decided to participate in the martial arts competition. No matter what schemes Lu Zhenyang had, they would all be exposed in 2 days. Rather than constantly worrying, it was better to face them calmly. After I put away Lu Zhenyang's sound transmission talisman, the fatty opened his eyes on the floor not far from me. This guy, because he wanted to verify the soul-devouring handprint with me, had been staying in my room for the past few days. It was obvious that he hadn't slept at all last night as he was busy dispelling the heaven's seal. Looking at my actions, the fatty asked, "Is there news about Lu Zhenyang?" I nodded. The fatty asked again, "There's finally news. When are we heading to Hebei?" Even though the fatty's advancement had been godly, 2 days wasn't enough for him to completely dispel the seal. I sighed, "There's still 2 more days. It's a pity that your seal hasn't been completely dispelled." "Why not?" Before I could finish my sentence, the fatty understood what I meant and interrupted me. "How can we do that? The martial arts competition was decided by the 2 of us and Lu Zhenyang. How can I let you go alone? I know that with my current power, it's hard to deal with Lu Zhenyang. But don't we still have 2 days? I'll work harder in these 2 days. No matter what, I'll be able to recover 60 to 70% of my power. At that time, with my Heaven's Master Realm cultivation, I'll be able to be of some use." The fatty insisted on going because he was worried about my safety. But while he was worried about me, how could I not be worried about him? If the fatty had reached the Heaven's Master Realm and condensed the Heaven's Master Seal, with his mystical formation, he'd be able to protect himself against Lu Zhenyang. With the power of the measuring heaven ruler and the monster refining gourd, I naturally had nothing to worry about. But the current problem was that the fatty's cultivation hadn't recovered yet. Even if he could recover a little in these 2 days, it would still be too dangerous for him to face Lu Zhenyang without becoming a Heaven's Master and condensing the seal. But before I could say anything, the fatty turned around and continued to cultivate the soul-devouring hand seal. Seeing that he was so serious and cultivating, I couldn't reject him anymore. I could only sigh and leave the room. A few days ago, after Zhang Canwen passed the soul-devouring hand seal to the fatty and me, he said that he was going out for a few days and entrusted little Wang Li to me, asking me to take care of him for a few days. At that time, I asked him what he was going to do, but he didn't tell me and just went out. So in the past few days, besides cultivating, I came to check on little Wang Li a few times a day. When I reached little Wang Li's room, Wang Kuan and his wife had already gotten up and were waiting for me in the room. I walked over and held little Wang Li for a long time. Although the situation hadn't worsened, I couldn't help but worry. Zhang Canwen hadn't returned for a long time, but he didn't say why. Although he already had the cultivation of a heaven's master and I wasn't worried, I was worried that if he didn't come back, I would have to leave in 2 days. At that time, there would be no one to take care of little Wang Li. If something happened, it would be big trouble. While I was thinking about my worries, little Wang Li woke up from his dream. His watery eyes blinked as he looked at me. I didn't know if he had a good dream, but he grinned at me. The little fellow's angelic smile made the irritation in my heart slightly lessen. I reached out and scratched his nose, whispering, "I don't know where your master ran off to, but you don't have to worry. I, Junior Marshal Uncle, will take care of you. Come, let's finish today's task first." As I said that, I put him back on the bed, circulated my true yuan, and began to sort out the little fellow's meridians. After taking care of the little fellow every day for the past few days, I had learned the meridian sorting technique from Zhang Canwen and was already very proficient. My true yuan entered little Wang Li's body bit by bit, constantly circulating and nourishing his meridians. Little Wang Li's soul was naturally strong. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to withstand the evil creature's scourge for nearly 2 years. In addition, Zhang Canwen and I had been constantly sorting out his meridians. In the future, when the evil creature was expelled and he began to cultivate with Zhang Canwen, he would definitely become a peerless genius that wasn't inferior to me. Although Zhang Canwen had already advanced to the Heaven's Master rank, if Mount Wen wanted to truly flourish, I would still have to rely on this baby who was still in swaddling clothes. After absorbing the power of God's punishment, my cultivation had also greatly improved. When I was sorting out little Wang Li's meridians, I was much faster than Zhang Canwen. In less than 10 minutes, I slowly withdrew the true yuan from the little fellow's body. The little fellow also cooperated and laughed at me. He waved his 2 lotus root-like arms, asking me to hug him. Looking at his adorable appearance, I grinned but didn't hug him. I just pinched his nose and smiled. "Don't worry, Marshal Uncle will prepare more things for you today." After saying that, I formed a seal with both hands and pressed on my dantian, summoning the seal. I didn't know what Zhang Canwen was busy with, but he hadn't returned yet. If Zhang Canwen still couldn't return after I left, I would definitely be worried about leaving little Wang Li in the care of Xie Chenghua and Lu Chuanda. Therefore, in order to avoid such a situation, I had to make preparations in advance and leave more tricks on little Wang Li. After absorbing the power of God's punishment, my seal had broken through to 5 feet and 6 inches. Coupled with the changes in the seal, although my cultivation hadn't reached the late stage of the seal, my strength had completely surpassed the late stage of the Heaven's Master rank. Compared to when I had just returned, I was much stronger. I circulated my true yuan and drove the Celestial Master seal towards little Wang Li. The reason I was able to seal the black smoke ghost face that came out of the little fellow's body was mainly because I had the 4 words, "Born Saint," on my seal. Chapter 673. In the metaphysics world, magical tools like seals usually had a suppressive power, and the Celestial Master Seal's suppressive power was even stronger. Just as my seal was about 1 foot away from little Wang Li, Ripples appeared on the deep pit in his chest, and kept shrinking. It was obvious that the aura in the pit was extremely afraid of my seal. But at this moment I controlled the seal to stop. I didn't dare to move forward. Although the seal could restrain the aura in the pit, the problem was that the pit was on little Wang Li's chest, which was related to his life. If I used too much force, not only would it disperse the aura in the pit, but it would also hurt little Wang Li. Little Wang Li's tendons and veins had become extremely tough under Zhang Kanwen and my care. However, under my celestial master true essence, he couldn't resist at all. Thus, I could only control my true essence to a very small extent and grope forward, slowly approaching little Wang Li's body. As the seal approached, a light in the shape of the Big Dipper appeared on little Wang Li's chest. It carried the aura of the 7-star mugwort. It was obviously the formation that Zhang Kanwen had used the 7-star mugwort to set up. Very quickly, my celestial master seal shone with a fluorescent light and condensed into the shape of a seal, pressing down on the dark pit. The Big Dipper and the seal got closer and closer. Then, they collided and merged into the black pit one after the other. During the whole process, I carefully controlled the amount of true essence I used and didn't cause any harm to little Wang Li. After I was done, I lifted my head and saw the little fellow looking at me curiously with his black eyes. I reached out to touch his head and carefully sensed him. The evil Yin energy on his body was still there, but it had dissipated a lot compared to before. I exhaled in relief. Although the process of setting up the seal was difficult, it was very smooth. With this seal, little Wang Li shouldn't have any problems in the short term. Even if Zhang Kanwen didn't come back for 10 days or half a month, it would be fine. Of course, this seal couldn't be done once and for all. After this period of time, I would have to wait for Zhang Kanwen to come back and nourish his body every day. After dealing with this matter, I held Wang Li in my arms and took him downstairs to the lobby. Although the wrath of heaven a few days ago had a great impact on the antique city, fortunately, it was at night and it was quickly settled. It didn't affect the business of the metaphysics shop much. At this time, the hall on the first floor was still bustling as usual. Seeing me come downstairs, Wang Kuen's wife hurried to welcome me. She took the little fellow from my arms and thanked me profusely. Instead, Wang Kuen walked over from afar. He looked at me and asked softly, "Mr. Little Zhou, are you leaving?" How did he know about this? I found it a bit strange, but I still nodded and replied, "Yes, in these 2 days." Upon hearing that, Wang Kuen heaved a sigh of relief. That's good, that's good. Before Mr. Zhang left, he told me that Mr. Little Zhou might be leaving in the next 2 days. He asked me to keep you here for a while longer. At the latest, he will be back around dinner time. Zhang Kanwen was coming back today? This was good news. Although I had already placed a restriction on little Wang Li, it was still better to have Zhang Kanwen by his side to protect him. However, why did Zhang Kanwen insist on keeping me here until he came back? I didn't seem to understand what he meant. Since I couldn't get anything from Wang Kuen, I could only put this matter aside for the time being. Fortunately, Lu Zhenyang's appointment with me was 2 days later. I wasn't in a hurry to leave today, so I could naturally wait until Zhang Kanwen came back in the evening. The day passed quickly. When it was dinner time, Zhang Kanwen's figure appeared outside the shop on time. He looked to be in very good condition. His clothes were ragged and there were a few bloodstains on his neck. It looked like he had just experienced a fierce battle. Upon seeing him in such a state, Wang Kuen and his wife went forward first. They immediately asked Zhang Kanwen what had happened and how he ended up in such a state. Xie Qinghua and Lu Chuanda, who were a few steps behind, were shocked when they saw Zhang Kanwen's state. Wang Kuen and his wife weren't cultivators, so they didn't know what the celestial master realm represented. However, Xie Qinghua and Lu Chuanda were very clear about it. In a situation where it didn't involve a blessed land, a celestial master was almost an immortal-like existence in the mortal world. However, after not seeing him for 5 days, Zhang Kanwen was in such a sorry state. He seemed to be seriously injured. Everyone couldn't help but feel strange. Following behind the crowd, I quickly went to welcome him. Before I could open my mouth, after Zhang Kanwen noticed me, he didn't care about Wang Kuan and the others. He grabbed my hand and walked upstairs. "Big brother Zhang, what happened to you?" I didn't know what he meant, so I asked curiously. Zhang Kanwen continued to walk upstairs, but his tone wasn't anxious. He said, "Nothing. I just went to get something." "Something?" I asked again, "What is it?" At this moment, we had reached the second floor. Zhang Kanwen didn't answer. He stopped at the door of a room and took the lead to push the door open. After I followed him in, he took out something from his pocket and handed it to me. "This is it." I lowered my head to look. It was a black iron ruler that was around 2 feet long and less than 1 inch wide. The side of the iron ruler facing me had been carved with small seal characters. As soon as the iron ruler appeared, the temperature in the room dropped significantly. It was as if the iron ruler was covered in ice. "Try it." Before I could understand what it was, Zhang Kanwen handed me the iron ruler. I extended my hand to receive it. As soon as I touched the iron ruler, I felt a cold air crawl up my arm. However, it didn't harm me in any way. Instead, the cold air made me feel very comfortable. My heart seemed to calm down. I held the iron ruler and studied it for a while. Then, I realized that the words carved on the ruler were a poem of the 7 absolute poems. The universe is vast, the sun and the moon are long in the mountains and forests, breaking the beach to pass the swallow's tail, cutting the stone to cut the sheep's intestines. Pan Gu's surname is Li, Lu Shan's surname is Kong. Famous people always meddle in other people's business. Once drunk, the waves are vast. I couldn't understand the meaning of the poem. However, as I read it, I felt a sense of tranquility. No wonder it could calm me down. I lifted my head. Zhang Kanwen clasped his hands behind his back and continued, "This iron ruler is called the mysterious Yin ruler. It's also called the calming ruler. It's said that our ancestor took the mysterious iron from the heavens to make it. It was born with the ability to calm people's minds. Later on, our ancestor refined it and made it our Mount Wen's inherited magical weapon. Its power isn't inferior to the yin-yang yama brush. However, our Mount Wen's inheritance declined, and this magical weapon fell into someone else's hands. My master had been searching for it for many years. 7 years ago, he received news about it. That year, my master took me and Wenfei to ask for it, but the results weren't satisfactory. However, that senior said that within 10 years, if someone from our Mount Wen could break through to the Heavenly Master realm and defeat him, he would return the mysterious Yin ruler. During these 5 days, I went to that senior's place to fulfill our promise. I took the mysterious Yin ruler back. Zhang Kanwen's voice was calm, but when he mentioned his master and Zhang Wenfei, it trembled slightly. I sighed. Zhang Kanwen's advancement to the Heavenly Master realm had a great impact on the Mount Wen's inheritance. It was just the beginning, but he had already taken back an inherited magical weapon. Although he was injured, it was a good thing. I was about to return the mysterious Yin ruler to him, but at that moment, Zhang Kanwen suddenly turned around and looked at me. "Zhou-Yi, what do you think of this treasure?" I was confused by Zhang Kanwen's question. Although I didn't know much about the Mount Wen's history, since he said that the mysterious Yin ruler wasn't inferior to the yin-yang yama brush, it was naturally an excellent treasure. Thus I nodded. After getting my answer, Zhang Kanwen nodded and said, "That's good. I'll give this mysterious Yin ruler to you." "Give it to me? I just took back an inherited treasure, and now I'm giving it to someone else?" I was puzzled and subconsciously shook my head to refuse. Mount Wen probably doesn't have many inherited magical weapons now. I've already taken the yin-yang yama brush. How can I take the mysterious Yin ruler? Chapter 674. Zhang Canwen's words made me feel upset. Zhang Wenfei and I were close friends. In my eyes, Zhang Canwen had always been a big brother. Ever since we met, he had always been by my side, saving me many times and helping me a lot. After Zhang Wenfei's accident, Zhang Canwen took care of me as if I was Zhang Wenfei. But as time passed, especially after little Wang Li's accident, Zhang Canwen's energy was almost completely tied up here. As for me, my cultivation kept increasing under various opportunities. In the end, I caught up to Zhang Canwen and even far surpassed him. My cultivation had changed, but my relationship with Zhang Canwen hadn't. In his eyes, I was still the little brother that needed to be taken care of. But he could no longer use his own cultivation to help me, and could only try his best to do something for me through other methods. I looked at Zhang Canwen and didn't know what to say. I just nodded and put away the mystic Yin ruler. Fatty had found out the 8 words: encountering Yang brings danger, seeking Yin brings protection. I knew that it couldn't be such a coincidence that Zhang Canwen had found the mystic Yin ruler. But Zhang Canwen's thoughts gave me great encouragement, and I was no longer so worried about the Zhuolu trip. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. In the last 2 days of preparation, Fatty continued to cultivate the lustful hand seal and removed the heavenly Tao seal in his body. Finally, before we left, he removed 60% of the seal on his cultivation. It was enough to surpass his cultivation when he was in the glorious knowledge realm. This made him extremely excited. As for me, I used these 2 days to refine the mystic Yin ruler that Zhang Canwen had given me. On the morning of the 3rd day, I brought Fatty to Baoan International Airport with Wang Kun and Zhang Canwen. We boarded the plane to Hebei. Before boarding the plane, Zhang Canwen hugged Fatty and me. He didn't say anything, but this simple farewell made me, who was used to seeing farewells, feel sad. Fatty patted Zhang Canwen's back and struggled out of his arms. He laughed and said, "All right, old Zhang, don't make it look like we're going to die. After 3rd baby and I take care of Lu Zhenyang, we'll come back and have a good drink." With Fatty's interruption, Zhang Canwen's expression relaxed a little. He forced a smile and nodded. "All right, I'll wait for you guys in the store. Go early and come back early." After hugging the Fatty, Zhang Canwen's gaze fell on me again. He didn't say anything and just extended his hand to pat my shoulder. Although Wang Kun didn't know why Fatty and I were here, looking at Zhang Canwen's expression, he knew that our trip wouldn't be easy. He had always regarded me as a deity, especially after saving little Zhang Canwen so many times. He worshipped me blindly. Now, looking at Zhang Canwen's appearance, he couldn't help but worry. He looked at the Fatty and me, his eyes turning red. I patted his shoulder and smiled. "What are you doing? We'll be back soon. We haven't gotten rid of that thing on Wang Li yet. When Fatty and I come back from Hebei, we'll completely solve little Wang Li's problem." After getting my promise, Wang Kun's expression became much better and he repeatedly said, "Okay." At that moment, the radio announced that we were about to board the plane. We said goodbye again and entered the security checkpoint. Although it was a long way from Shenzhen to Hebei, it only took a few hours on the plane. After arriving at the Hebei Zhengding International Airport, Fatty and I decided to take a taxi to Tower Village. However, after looking for a few taxi drivers, they all said that they didn't know the place. Fatty and I could only settle for the next best option. We took a taxi to Zhuolu County. Only after we arrived at Zhuolu County did we find a taxi that could take us to Tower Village. We had been to Shandong's Jianzhu Mound before, but compared to that place, Zhulu's Qiyu culture was much richer. On the way to Tower Village, the driver kept introducing Qiyu to me and the Fatty. According to them, Qiyu didn't look like the demon king or the god of war that we knew him to be. Instead, he looked more like a wise leader of a tribe. They even called him, along with Emperor Yan and Emperor Huang, the ancestors of China. Their words were full of admiration. With my understanding of ancient myths and legends, It wasn't a problem for me to say that. That's why I sat in the back seat and listened. Sometimes I would say a few words to the driver. China's culture had a long history. However, with the passage of time, some ancient myths and legends had disappeared in the long river of history and were unknown to the people of today. An ordinary driver here could tell us all about Chiyo's deeds. From this, it could be seen that the local government had done a good job in protecting and spreading the local culture. After chatting for a while, the driver suddenly changed the topic and said to us, "You two look like cultured people. Why did you come to Tower Village? Are you here to pay respects to Chiyu? If that's the case, you didn't come at the right time. I suggest you come here every year during the Qiming festival. During that time, many people come here, including foreigners. It's very lively here." I smiled and shook my head. "No, we just came here to have fun. If we can pay our respects to Chiyu, it'll be even better." After hearing that we weren't here for Chiyu, the driver's enthusiasm faded a little. He nodded and said, "Just to have fun? That's good. It's the right time to come here. During this season, the scenery here is very good. A few days ago, many Taoist priests came to Mount Longhu in Jiangxi. They gathered at the Three Pure Temple. They said that they were going to hold a ritual. It's very lively. You didn't make a mistake coming here to have fun." Many Taoist priests came to Mount Longhu? From the relationship between Mount Longhu and Lu Zhenyang, it wasn't strange that the cow-noses of Mount Longhu had come here. However, why did they make such a big fuss and hold a ritual? Even an ordinary person like the driver had heard about it. I guess they were plotting something. After pondering for a while, I thought of Chiyo's tomb. Could it be that those cow-noses also got the news and wanted to go to Chiyo's tomb? If that was the case, this trip to Zhulu would have more variables. Mount Longhu had always been a tall tree that attracted the wind. If they made a move, countless eyes in the metaphysics world would be watching them. Who knew if they would attract more people? The situation was getting more complicated. I couldn't help but frown. After pondering for a long time, I didn't have enough information. I couldn't figure out the situation, so I had to put this matter aside for now. I lifted my head and looked out the window. It was already late. Lu Zhenyang had told me that the time was today. In theory, as long as it wasn't past midnight, it would be today. However, it wasn't good to delay it too much. I urged the driver. "How long until we reach Pagoda Village?" The driver didn't turn his head and said, "Young man, why are you in such a hurry? It should be around half an hour. Anyway, if you're in a hurry, I'll drive faster." Although the other party was Lu Zhenyang, it wasn't good to break a promise. I agreed with him. Seeing that I agreed, the driver stepped on the gas and the car sped up. He pushed me and the fatty to the back of the seat. The driver had good driving skills. Even though the car was driving at full speed, it was still very stable. Around 10 minutes later, we arrived at our destination. After we got out of the car, the driver asked for a long time about our return time. He said that he would pick us up at that time. Although we had a good chat, I didn't know the return time, so I tactfully declined. After watching the driver leave, the fatty lifted his head to look at the village in front of us. He asked me, "Third baby, where are we going now?" I looked at the fatty. This was a problem. Lu Zhenyang's message only told us to meet at Pagoda Village today. He didn't tell us where we were going. Previously, when we were in Zhulu County, I had used a sound-transmitting talisman to ask Lu Zhenyang about the situation. However, he didn't reply even after a long time. The function of a sound-transmitting talisman wasn't much different from a text message on a cell phone. After I sent the message, Lu Zhenyang would receive it immediately. However, Lu Zhenyang hadn't replied even after so much time had passed. Combined with what the driver had said about Mount Longhu, I couldn't help but think that Lu Zhenyang had encountered some trouble. It wasn't a bad thing for me if Lu Zhenyang was in trouble. However, since the situation was unclear, I had to wait and see. Chapter 675. The driver took us as far as the entrance of Tower Village. We had to walk a long way to enter the village. He led the fatty forward and finally entered Tower Village. But after walking a little further, I stopped. There was definitely something wrong with this Tower Village. I am a metaphysician, so I am very sensitive to geomancy and geomorphology. No matter where I go, I will subconsciously look at things from the perspective of metaphysics. When I see a mountain, I look at the mountain. When I see a grave, I look at the grave. It has long been a habit, although in recent years, with the gradual increase of my cultivation, the opportunities for me to look at geomancy have decreased a lot. However, I haven't abandoned this habit, and it has continued. In the study of feng shui, there were generally 4 major ominous positions: fate position, 5 ghosts position, 6 evils position, and disaster position. In these 4 locations, no matter if one built a house in the living or buried people to build a house in the dead, there wouldn't be any good result. If it was light, it would cause constant bumps in life. If it was heavy, it would immediately attract disaster, leading to the destruction of the family. The fatal position was the position where the Alcade star would fly. Among the 5 elements, the destruction army belonged to the metal element. Its aura was reserved, but it itself had the intent of creation. It possessed extremely strong destructive power and self-destructive power. The 5 ghost positions were where the Lianjian star was flying towards. The Lianjian star's 5 elements were of the fire attribute, so the 5 ghost positions were extremely ferocious and chaotic. The positions countered each other, and disasters followed the positions. Although they were ranked after the fatal position, the degree of ferociousness was almost the same. People in the 5 ghost positions tend to be short-tempered and have a hard time getting along with others. Even friends and family often have conflicts and quarrels. The 3rd position, the 6 evil spirits, was the position where the Wenxiu star flew, which was more elegant and noble. However, Wenxiu belonged to water, and the flow of the qi field was messy. This position was good for children, but not for adults. It was especially bad for relationships, marriage, and career. If there was 6 evils qi in the house, it would make people listless, depressed, unable to think things through, and often make low-level mistakes. At the same time, it was easy to provoke gossip and sleep problems. The last position was where Lu Xuanxing was flying towards. The 5 elements of the lucent star belonged to Earth, and its qi was heavy and stagnant. The aura in this area could easily disturb one's state of mind, causing one to become depressed and lack the spirit to strive and forge ahead. Being constantly bothered by trivial matters would lead to tiredness. The impact on one's fortune was minor, but the greatest harm was on one's mental health. I haven't been in the world of metaphysics for a long time, but I've seen a lot over the years. I've seen a few of the legendary 4 evils on and off. However, this is the first time I've seen a place like Pagoda Village that has all 4 vicious beasts. Just take the leading position as an example. Although this position was dangerous, it wasn't like there was no way to break it. If it was used well, one could even forge ahead and turn the danger into a blessing. To be more specific, it was to use metal as the spirit and reverse yin and yang. Although it was more troublesome, after the reversal, one could obtain the power to break through the army and turn it into an auspicious position. But this way, the god of gold would increase the ominous qi of the other 3 positions. By the same logic, the other 3 inauspicious positions also had their own ways of resolving them. However, without exception, resolving one inauspicious position would affect the other 3 and cause them to become even more vicious. Each of the 4 inauspicious positions was a single entity, but they were all interconnected. Pulling a single hair on one part would affect the entire body. There was no way to resolve it. Strictly speaking, these 4 inauspicious positions weren't unheard of in the world of metaphysics, but they were extremely rare. They were usually located in unfrequented wilderness and didn't affect people much. Naturally, there was no need to resolve them. This was similar to how human civilization mostly originated from the riverside. Humans would choose a place that was suitable for their survival. It was natural selection. For example, the vast sea desert, the treacherous mountains, and other places where life was forbidden. Naturally, no one would deliberately seek trouble there. However, this pagoda village was different. Not only was it located in the center of the 4 inauspicious positions, but it also had a flourishing population. It had even formed a village. I couldn't understand this. I kept thinking about it, but I couldn't figure out the reason behind it. Since I had so many questions in my head, my footsteps slowed down, and my face became more solemn. The fat man seemed to have noticed my change. Not long after we entered the village, he turned around and asked me curiously, "Third baby, what's wrong?" I shook my head and frowned. I told the fatty about the geomancy I had seen. Although the fatty was also a metaphysician, he didn't know much about geomancy. After listening to me, he gawked. After a long time, he said, "Didn't you say that Lu Zhenyang called us here to go to the Chio's skull mound? Is it possible that the Chio's skull mound is here and has such a strange geomancy?" The reason he mentioned was quite possible. I had been guessing for a long time, but it was the only reason I could think of. However, it didn't make sense. I couldn't explain why this place had a flourishing population. Seeing that I didn't say anything, the fatty continued. The driver said that many old Taoist priests from Mount Longhu came here. Do you think it's possible that they came here because of the strange geomancy of this village? I shook my head. Although the people from Mount Longhu also dealt with geomancy, they weren't kind people who would come here to solve people's problems. There were only 2 reasons why they had come here. One was to chase after Lu Zhenyang and come here with him, and the other was that they had obtained information about the Chio's skull mound and wanted to get a share of the loot. However, speaking of Mount Longhu, I became more vigilant. After all, they and I were mortal enemies. If we accidentally bumped into each other, it would be a fight to the death. Before Lu Zhenyang showed up and the situation was unclear, I didn't want to cause more trouble. As for Lu Zhenyang, I didn't need to worry too much. He had asked me to come here because he needed my help. Before that, he wouldn't attack me. There was no doubt about it. Thinking about this, I couldn't help but laugh. The relationship between me, Lu Zhenyang, and Mount Longhu was like the 4 ominous characters in Tower Village. Between us, there were grudges and grudges. Pulling one hair in one place could affect the whole group. On the surface, no matter if it was Lu Zhenyang or Mount Longhu, they were much stronger than me and the fatty. Thus, after we had mysteriously joined them, we were faced with a fatal situation. However, after thinking about it, the more complicated the situation was, the more room there was for us to take advantage of. If we could make good use of the grudges between the 3 of us, it wouldn't be impossible for us to escape unscathed with the fatty. As we walked forward, we quickly reached a bustling area. Tower Village had the cultural scenery of Chio's tomb. Naturally, it was a place that the people in charge focused on developing. In recent years, Zhulu County had tried to turn Tower Village into an ecotourism base. They had invested a lot of money and formulated many generous policies. With this kind of support, Tower Village attracted a lot of foreign businessmen and began to develop the tourism industry. However, it was strange that after so many years, Tower Village hadn't developed at all. It hadn't achieved the desired effect. Some people said that it was because of Chio's vicious soul that intimidated the people who came here, making it hard for them to feel at ease. The tourists who came here always felt uncomfortable and wanted to leave after a few days. The development of the tourism industry had also suffered a serious setback. When I had looked up information before coming here, I had more or less agreed with this theory. After all, Chiyu was one of the ancestors of humanity. His spirit and will had existed for thousands of years. It was completely possible for it to have a small impact on the burial ground. However, after coming here and identifying the positions of the 4 ominous characters, I didn't think so anymore. It didn't matter if Chiyu had the time to care about the tourists. Just the position of the 4 ominous characters was enough to make them suffer. It was normal that this place couldn't develop. It would be strange if it did. Of course, although the development of the tourism industry wasn't that great, it was still flourishing. This place didn't lack leisure villas. Not long after the fatty and I walked into the village, we saw a few well-maintained buildings. Cultivators were adaptable to their circumstances. We didn't have too many requirements for the accommodations. After looking at a nice leisure villa, I brought the fatty in and booked a room to stay the night. After a long day of traveling, the 2 of us were tired. After entering the room, the fatty lay on the bed. He didn't want to go out to eat, so he called the front desk to order some food. However, before the food arrived, he had already fallen asleep on the bed. Chapter 676. The driver who had brought us to the village didn't lie. Tower Village didn't have any interesting places. The hotel's guidebook only had a few pages with a few scenic spots. Among them, there were only 3 that interested me. One was Zen Master Ju's spiritual pagoda, the other was Mount Tai's Holy Mother Temple, and the last one was our destination, the Southern Chiyu Tomb. According to historical records and legends, the Yellow Emperor fought Chiyu at Julu. Chiyu was killed, and his head was buried in 2 places. Part of his body was hidden here. Since this place was south of Chiyu's battlefield, it was called the Southern Chiyu Tomb. In the guidebook, there was only a short description of the Chiyu Tomb. It was very simple and crude. It was strange compared to the Chiyu culture I had experienced when I arrived at Julu County. I didn't know if it was deliberately hiding something. After reading for a while, I threw the guidebook aside and started to plan my next move. The reason I had agreed to go to Julu with Lu Zhenyang was that he had the fatty's monster refining gourd and the 2nd volume of the Death Scripture. After I had entered the Heavenly Master realm, I lacked cultivation technique. That was why the 2nd volume of the Death Scripture was very important to me. Lu Zhenyang hadn't appeared yet, but regardless of whether he appeared or not, I had to go to the Chiyu Tomb. As I thought about these things, I walked to the window and glanced outside. I happened to see Zen Master Ju's pagoda facing Pagoda Village. I hadn't read the guidebook carefully, but I didn't expect that the spiritual pagoda would be so close to my villa. At first glance, Zen Master Ju's spiritual pagoda wasn't tall. However, it looked really tall and imposing as it stood on the opposite slope. Just as I was examining the spiritual pagoda, there was a sudden knock on the door. I lifted my head to look at the clock on the wall and frowned. Only 5 minutes had passed since the fatty had ordered the food. How could this hotel be so efficient? How did they prepare our food so quickly? Before I could figure it out, a woman's voice came from outside the room. "Are you Mr. Zhou-yi?" Hearing that, my heart tightened. Naturally, I didn't know anyone in Tower Village. The only people I knew were Lu Zhenyang and those cow-noses from Mount Longhu. Who was this woman outside? She actually knew my name. With doubts in my heart, I was about to open the door when the female voice passed through the wooden door and into the room. "Mr. Zhou-yi, please don't misunderstand. I don't have any ill intentions. I just want to talk to you alone. Before you entered the room, I cast a spell on Mr. Lin Hu. I believe he is already asleep. Please open the door. I will come in and help Mr. Lin Hu remove the spell." Hearing this, I stopped in my tracks and furrowed my brows. This person actually cast a spell on Fatty. Fatty now had the cultivation of a heavenly adept. Although he could not unleash the full strength of a heavenly adept due to the heavenly Tao's seal, his strength was definitely not ordinary. How could he fall for someone else's trick so easily? What was even more frightening was that I had been with Fatty the entire time. We hadn't been separated for even a moment. This meant that when the enemy had attacked Fatty, I had been right next to him, But I hadn't noticed. This woman was able to attack Fatty right under my nose, so her cultivation was at least at the young god realm. I became even more suspicious, but I temporarily suppressed the anger in my heart. I used my insight power to observe Fatty. He was in a deep sleep, and the corners of his mouth were hooked into a smile. He didn't seem to be in any serious trouble. Only then did I relax. The woman outside the room seemed to be a little anxious. Seeing that I still didn't move, she continued, "Mr. Joe, if you don't believe me, I will teach you the method to break this spell. When Mr. Lin who wakes up, please open the door." Hearing what she said, I was about to open the door, but I stopped again. With the cultivation that she had revealed, a small, ordinary door naturally wouldn't be able to trap her. However, she didn't come in without permission. Instead, she talked to me first. Just this attitude alone proved that the other party didn't have strong hostility towards me. However, I felt very uncomfortable that she had secretly attacked Fatty. Plus, I was a little worried. Hearing her suggestion, I nodded and agreed. Thus, I replied through the door, "Then, please teach me the method to break the spell. When my brother wakes up, I will open the door to welcome you." After getting my promise, the woman outside the room immediately replied, "I will teach you the method to break the nightmare spell. Mister, please listen carefully." Then, she whispered the method to break the spell in detail. The Heavenly Master Realm had a photographic memory. After listening to her, I memorized it. I didn't have the time to marvel at the magic of the spell and started to deduce it in my heart. Until now, I still wasn't sure if this woman was a friend or foe. I didn't dare to casually use the spell that she had taught me on Fatty. After I carefully deduced it several times, although I hadn't completely understood it, I could roughly confirm that the spell wouldn't cause any harm. Then, I walked to Fatty's side and tried to use the spell on Fatty's body. Although the woman's method of contacting us was a little extreme, she didn't lie to me. After I used the method on Fatty, Fatty immediately sat up on the bed. He seemed to have heard some noises outside the room. With a sleepy face, he asked me, "Third baby, did our food arrive?" Seeing his appearance, I was angry and amused. This fellow didn't even notice that someone had done something to him. He still remembered the food that he had ordered before going to bed. Before I could say anything, the woman's voice came from outside the door again. "Mr. Zhou, Mr. Lin who has woken up. Can you open the door now?" When Fatty heard the voice, he thought that it was the delivery man. He cheerfully got up and opened the door. However, as soon as he sat up, he seemed to realize that something was wrong. He stopped and looked at me suspiciously. I didn't have time to explain to him. I directly walked over and opened the door. Although I didn't like the way the other party had contacted me, I didn't refuse since we had an appointment. After the door opened, I looked up and saw a woman standing outside. She looked to be around 20 years old, even younger than me and the Fatty. Although she was wearing modern clothes, her long hair was tied into a simple bun at the back of her head. Her entire attire looked a little weird, but when matched with her gentle and beautiful face, it looked very harmonious. Seeing that she was alone outside the door, I relaxed a little. I stepped back and said, "Please come in." The woman didn't stand on ceremony. She smiled at me and bowed to greet me. Then, she walked in. After entering the room, she looked around and found Fatty. She bowed to him and said apologetically, "I'm Wu Yu. I'm the owner of Mount Tai's Holy Mother Temple. I'm not a manservant who came to deliver food." To enter the room, I used the nightmare spell on Mr. Lin. "Please forgive me if I have offended you." Hearing her, Fatty opened his eyes wide. His face was bewildered. It was obvious that he didn't know what had happened. From her words, I managed to glean a few key pieces of information. Wu Yu? The owner of Mount Tai's Holy Mother Temple? I was sure that I didn't know this woman with a strange name. I was also sure that I had never had anything to do with this Mount Tai's Holy Mother Temple. Why did she suddenly come here to see me? I carefully recalled the travel guide I had just read. It had a lot of information about Mount Tai's Holy Mother Temple. It said that it had a long history and that before it was built, there was an anecdote. At that time, strange things happened in Tower Village. People often died of serious illnesses, and livestock died mysteriously. A traveling Taoist priest passed by the village. At first glance, he knew that this place was extremely dangerous. If he wanted to solve the problem, he had to build a temple halfway up the mountain to solve the problem. Many strange things had frightened the villagers. When they heard that there was a way to solve the problem, they asked the owner of the house to contribute money and the owner of the house to build the Mount Tai's Holy Mother Temple. After the temple was built, the strange things in the village disappeared. Later on, the traveling Taoist priest stayed in the temple. After 2 or 3 years, the villagers gradually got used to the temple and the Taoist priest. Whenever they encountered a problem, they would go to the temple to ask for help. The Taoist priest never refused them. At the beginning of the 4th year, a family in the village was in trouble. They went up the mountain to look for the Taoist priest. However, no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't find the Taoist priest. A few days later, people in the village spread a rumor that the Taoist priest had succeeded in his cultivation and ascended to the heavens. This rumor made the Mount Tai's Holy Mother Temple reach its peak. Chapter 677. Looking at Wu Yu in front of me, I quickly thought about the story of Mount Tai's Saint Mother Temple. First of all, I could confirm that the traveling Taoist priest wasn't a swindler. Although the knowledge of the 4 evils wasn't profound, it wasn't something that ordinary people could easily see through. That Taoist priest could see that Tower Village was built in a dangerous place, which meant that he was very knowledgeable. Moreover, it was possible that he had a cultivation base. However, the fact that he had used a temple to resolve the Tower Village's evils didn't seem so real. Since ancient times, there had been many cases of feng shui patterns being resolved by large-scale construction. This was not surprising. However, it was absolutely impossible to resolve the ominous feng shui of the fatal position, the 5 ghost position, the 6 evils position, and the scourge position with the coexistence of the 4 evils. Even the goddess temple of Mount Tai could not do it. Moreover, Mount Tai was far away in Shandong, while Tower Village was in Hebei. No matter how powerful Mount Tai's Saint Mother Temple was, it couldn't be that far away. From this point of view, this Mount Tai's Saint Mother Temple was fishy. Moreover, that traveling Taoist priest had traveled thousands of miles from Shandong to Hebei to build such a temple. He must have some ulterior motive. As for what he wanted, it wasn't hard to guess. I had traveled thousands of miles to this place for Southern Chio's tomb. That Taoist priest's goal was likely the same. The woman in front of me called Wu Yu claimed to be the master of Mount Tai's Saint Mother Temple. Her behavior was strange, so she must be related to that traveling Taoist priest. As I pondered, I bowed to Wu Yu and asked, "Miss, you came to visit me late at night and used this method. You must have something important to tell me. If there's anything I can help you with, please tell me." Wu Yu had gone through a lot of trouble to see me and the fatty. I wouldn't believe her if she said that she didn't want anything. However, I wasn't sure if she was a friend or a foe, so I had to be careful. Although her incubus spell didn't have much attack power, it could instantly destroy our combat power through some mysterious means. Compared to the main offensive spells, it was even more terrifying. Hearing my words, Wu Yu smiled. "Mr. Zhou, you're right. I came here this time to ask for your help. Here it comes." After being busy for a long time, she finally expressed her purpose. However, I still had some doubts in my heart and asked, "From the nightmare technique that lady just used, your cultivation is much higher than the both of us. Lady, you can't do it, so why are you asking me for help?" Wu Yu shook his head. "There are some things that I can't do, but you can easily do it, Mr. Zhou. What I want is for Mr. Zhou to leave this place." "Leave?" I rejected the proposal in my mind almost without thinking. Our trip this time is firstly to fulfill our appointment with Lu Zhenyang and ask him to return the demon refining gourd. Secondly, we are going to Chiyo's tomb to search for the second volume of the Death Scripture. Not to mention these two items, I haven't even seen Lu Zhenyang yet. How could I possibly leave? I lifted my head to look at Wu Yu. Her beautiful face seemed to be filled with the word uncompromising. After hesitating for a moment, I shook my head and replied, "Miss has a request and I also have a request. I'm afraid that we won't be leaving for the time being." After hearing what I said, Wu Yu didn't seem surprised at all. She waved her hand and continued, "Misters, don't be in a hurry to reject me. Tower Village isn't as simple as you think. I know why you're here, but I still want to advise you not to have any ideas about those items." Those items? Chiyo's inheritance or the second volume of the Death Scripture? I frowned. I wasn't sure how much information Wu Yu knew about me. Seeing that I didn't speak, Wu Yu didn't force me. Instead, she smiled and said, "I know that you definitely won't give up so easily. However, if Mr. Zhou is free, you can come to my temple first. I'll show you some things. After that, Mr. Zhou should know whether to stay or leave." His words were even stranger. Just as I was thinking about how to reject him, there was another knock on the door. "Hello, Mr. Lin. I'm here to deliver food. Can I trouble you to open the door?" The food that the fatty had ordered just now really arrived. When the fatty heard the voice, his eyes lit up. He was probably starving. Even I couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Wu Yu's words were tactful, as though she was giving me and the fatty room to choose. However, in reality, she didn't give us any room to bargain. We hadn't gotten the demon refining gourd, the second volume of the Death Scripture, and Lu Zhenyang hadn't even appeared yet. Under such circumstances, we definitely wouldn't leave. However, I didn't want to offend the mysterious young god's celestial master as soon as I arrived. Hence, I was conflicted and didn't know how to answer. The delivery man came at just the right time, temporarily dissolving the tense atmosphere in front of them. I pointed at the door and gestured for me to open the door. Wu Yu nodded, but then said, "I know that Mr. Zhou definitely won't leave so easily just by saying that. How about this? Mr. Zhou is tired from the journey, so you should rest tonight. Tomorrow morning, the two of you can come to my Mount Tai Goddess Temple, and we'll discuss it. How about that?" She gave us some buffer time. I also needed time to think about it. Hearing that, I immediately nodded and agreed. Seeing me nod, Wu Yu smiled again. Then, she looked at us meaningfully and didn't say anything. Under the gaze of the fatty and I, her figure actually dissipated like mist. She really was the young god's celestial master. The ability to disappear in an instant was the ability that only a young god's celestial master could have. Teleportation. The fatty was bold. After seeing her leave, he immediately walked over to open the door and asked the delivery man to bring in the food. I stood on the spot and frowned, thinking about what the mysterious woman had just said. First of all, her cultivation was very high. Ordinary young god celestial masters couldn't use teleportation. At the very least, they had to reach the middle stage of young god before they could start to practice it. If they wanted to truly master it, they would have to reach the late stage of young god. Since her cultivation was so high, she didn't attack us directly. Instead, she kept communicating with us. From this point, it could be seen that she didn't have much hostility towards us. But if that was the case, why did she persuade us to leave? This was just a small matter. More importantly, why did she know about the fatty and my identities? How much did she know about us? After thinking for a long time, my head was still a mess. When I turned my head, I saw that the fatty had already started eating. I walked over and sat down. I didn't have the mood to eat, so I asked the fatty, "Do you think we should go to Mount Tai Goddess Temple tomorrow morning?" The fatty chewed and said vaguely, "Let's go. Why wouldn't we go? In my opinion, that beautiful woman doesn't look like a bad person. Besides, no matter what the situation is, we have to understand it before we can make a judgment. This guy had always been without ideas, but what he said was right. I thought for a while and decided to go to the Holy Mother Temple on Mount Tai tomorrow morning. With Wu Yu's cultivation, she shouldn't have set up a trap and waited for us to walk into it. If she wanted to deal with us, she could have done it just now. There was no need to go through so much trouble. After making up my mind, I didn't think much about it. After eating with the fatty, we went to bed early. Pagoda Village was full of strange things. Of course, I didn't dare to sleep too soundly. However, the following night was peaceful. I didn't even hear the chirping of birds or insects. The next morning, after the fatty and I woke up, I tried to contact Lu Jinyang. Still, I didn't get a reply. I put the sound-transmitting talisman aside and ate breakfast in the hotel. I asked someone for directions to Mount Tai's Saint Mother Temple. Then, I went to the temple. Last night, we had come in a hurry. When we reached the hotel, it was already dark, and we couldn't see the surroundings. Today, the sky was bright and beautiful. As soon as we got out of the villa, we saw Zen Master Ju's spiritual pagoda. Zen Master Ju's spiritual pagoda was located in the east of Pagoda Village. It was in the calamity position, one of the four evils. The calamity position was where Lu Tsuanxing would fly. Lu Tsuanxing belonged to the yin element, and its energy was heavy and sluggish. I carefully observed the surroundings. Soon after, I found that the spiritual pagoda had the effect of suppressing the earth energy. To a large extent, it could dissolve Lu Tsuanxing's ominous energy. However, it also increased the ominous energy in the Fate, 5 Ghost, and 6 Evil positions. Chapter 678. The Mount Tai Saint Mother Temple worshipped the Saint Mother of Mount Tai. In the religion of northern China, the Saint Mother of Mount Tai had a high status. She was worshipped for more than 1,000 years. She was also known as the Immortal Fairy of Mount Tai, Blue Cloud Progenitor, or simply Blue Cloud Progenitor. Her temple was located on Mount Tai. Among the people, there was a saying, Northern Primordial Monarch, Southern Matriarch, or Northern Matriarch, Southern Matriarch. As for the goddess of Mount Tai Temple in Tower Village, from a geographical point of view, it was built on a hill to the west of the village. It faced Zen Master Ju's spiritual pagoda from afar. The two of them passed through Tower Village at the foot of the mountain and formed a complete straight line. Thus, the murderous energy suppressed by Zen Master Ju's spiritual pagoda could be transmitted to this place, where the Mount Tai Saint Mother Temple shared a part of it. Although the murderous energy in the position of calamity was strong, it was suppressed by Zen Master Ju's spiritual pagoda and divided by the Mount Tai Saint Mother Temple. It wasn't difficult to erase it completely. However, after observing for a while, I found a problem. The Mount Tai Saint Mother Temple in front of me, which was built in an unknown era, was located in the most dangerous position of the 4 calamities in Tower Village. It was the fatal position. The fatal position was where the Army Destroyer star flew to, hence its name. It had the meaning of ending one's life if one stayed there for a long time. Back in the day, people in Tower Village often fell seriously ill, and some even died mysteriously. A large part of the reason was because of the existence of this suicide spot. If it wasn't for the traveling Taoist who discovered it in time, none of those who fell seriously ill would have been able to escape the vicious aura of this suicide spot. Although the goddess temple of Mount Tai could suppress it, at the same time, there was another ferocious aura that spread to Zen Master Ju's pagoda. As time passed, the ferocious auras on both sides could not be completely eliminated. They could only gradually strengthen. After a simple observation, I followed the fatty and continued to walk forward. Although the Mount Tai Saint Mother Temple in front of us was built on a barren mountain, it had been worshipping people for years. The road leading to the mountain had long been paved by the villagers. The fat man and I followed the winding path up the mountain. Before we were halfway there, The fat man shouted that he was tired. He sat on the ground and rubbed his knees. No matter what, he had to rest. Cultivators had a much stronger body than ordinary people. However, before they reached the heavenly master realm, their bodies were still ordinary. Although the fatty had already condensed true essence, he had not yet completely removed the heavenly Tao seal. In addition to his fat body, it was normal for him to feel tired. Begrudgingly, I stopped and found a relatively flat rock by the roadside to sit down. As Fatty panted, he looked at the goddess of Mount Tai Temple on the mountainside and sighed. That little girl, Wu Yu, looks quite beautiful. Why does she live so far away and even ask us to wake up so early to look for her? She definitely doesn't have any good intentions. I'm so tired. Looking at this fellow's lazy expression, I felt helpless and sighed. You've been growing more and more horizontally these past 2 years. When we remove the seal on your body, use your true essence to refine the fat on your body. After you lose weight, even if you don't use your cultivation, climbing mountains won't be so tiring. Hearing what I said, the fatty's face was full of disdain. He rolled his eyes at me and said snappily, I gained weight with my own abilities. Why should I lose weight? I was stunned and didn't know how to respond. I could only nod with a wry smile. All right. Money can't buy your happiness. As long as you're happy. The fatty chuckled and said, Third baby, look at me. I've been a fatty since I was a child. It would have been fine if I had lost weight, but I clearly didn't lose weight. I used my quintessential essence to refine myself and make myself thinner. Can I still be myself in the future? His words stunned me. After a moment of silence, I couldn't help but look at the fatty. This guy was always laughing and joking all day long. I didn't expect him to say such deep words occasionally. Thus, I didn't bring up the topic again. While the fatty was resting, I looked around. Due to the strange geomancy of Tower Village, my old habit of being a geomancer came back. I couldn't help but look around from a geomancy perspective. At this moment, the fatty and I were very close to the goddess of Mount Tai Temple. Thus, the aura of the fatal position was even more obvious. However, although the fatal position was a perilous place, as the saying goes, when things reach an extreme, they move in the opposite direction. In this perilous place, there were still a few places with relatively strong vitality. I looked around and quickly found 2 of them. The first one was Tower Village, at the foot of the mountain. Besides Zen Master Ju's spiritual pagoda and the goddess of Mount Tai Temple, the reason why Tower Village had been able to survive in this perilous place for so many years was because of its location. The second one was the small forest not far from where the fatty and I were resting. In this fatal position, no matter if it was flowers, birds, or trees, they couldn't survive. If it weren't for the fact that it was in the right place, the vigorous trees wouldn't have been able to escape the fate of withering and dying. While I was pondering, a mountain breeze brushed past. The verdant grass in the small forest swayed with the wind, creating rustling sounds. I focused and saw a few figures hiding in the forest. My heart shivered. With my current cultivation base, my spirit sense could cover an area of 100 meters around me. If there were people hiding in the forest, why hadn't I sensed them? I didn't have much time to think. The figures in the forest seemed to have discovered me. They turned around and walked toward me and the fatty. However, it was very dark in the forest, and I was standing under the sun. I tried to look carefully, but I couldn't see the figure's face. At this moment, the fatty also noticed that something was wrong. He got up from the ground and jogged to my side. What's wrong, third baby? I didn't answer and pointed at the forest opposite us. At this moment, the figure in the forest had reached the edge of the forest. If he took another step, he would walk out of the forest. However, he seemed to be afraid of the outside world. He stopped and waved at us as if he wanted to call us over. The fatty followed my finger and saw the figure. He was surprised and asked, "Who is that? Third baby, do you know him?" I shook my head. I don't know him, but from his expression, it seems he wants to call us over. No, we can't. The fatty waved his hand. This tower village is very strange. From what I can see, this fellow who suddenly appeared isn't a good person. We shouldn't meddle in other people's business. We should hurry to the temple. The fatty had always been a coward. When he saw this strange scene, he instinctively wanted to hide. I thought about it and felt that the fatty was right. It was better to avoid unnecessary trouble. There are many strange things happening in Tower Village, so I have no choice but to be cautious. Moreover, we had an appointment with Wu Yu this morning. Since the fatty was traveling slowly, it was already 10 o'clock in the morning. If we delayed it any longer, I was afraid that he would have finished his lunch. After thinking about this, I didn't care about the figure in the forest. I called the fatty and turned to leave. We continued to head toward the Mount Tai Goddess Temple. But at this moment, the figure in the shade of the tree became anxious. He picked up the stones on the ground and threw them at us one by one, as if he wanted to stop us from moving forward. This made me feel even weirder. I couldn't help but stop and turn around to exchange glances with the fatty. Before we could say anything, a stone whistled and hit the fat man's head. Instinctively, he staggered a step back. This time, the fatty was completely enraged. He glared at me and turned around. He said angrily, "You've gone too far. I didn't want to talk to you. Do you think I'm easy to bully?" Then, he rolled up his sleeves and ran under the tree. I wanted to pull him back, but he was too fast. I didn't manage to stop him. So, I simply followed him. The fatty looked reckless, but he was actually very careful. Just now, he thought that it was better to avoid trouble because he didn't know the background of the figure in the forest. Just now, when he threw the stone, I felt the fluctuation of Tao energy. I roughly sensed it and found that the other's cultivation base was only at the sealing acupoint realm. He was even at the dragon-seeking realm. He wasn't a threat to us. If I could feel it, the fatty could feel it too. That was why he didn't hesitate and rushed over. As for me, it wasn't entirely because I wanted to stop the fatty, but more because I was curious about him. At first, I thought that the figure in the forest was deliberately hiding here to harm us. That was why I left in a hurry. However, after seeing through his cultivation, he immediately ruled out this conjecture in his heart. Instead, he became doubtful. Chapter 679. The area under the tree's shade was a bit lower than our current location. Running downhill was much easier than running uphill. Not long after, we reached the tree's shade. After getting closer, I could see the figure in the tree's shade. It was a young Taoist priest with a Taoist crown on his head. He looked around 14 or 15 years old, and from his Taoist crown, he seemed to be from Mount Longhu. After seeing him clearly, I frowned. The fat man was enraged. He clenched his fists and angrily shouted at the young Taoist priest in front of him. "Damn it! Why are you cow-noses here again? Do you think I'm easy to bully?" Then, he clenched his fists and prepared to take action. In the past 2 years, I had a deep grudge with Mount Longhu. The fat man's situation was similar to mine. First, they had been kidnapped by those cow-noses. Then, they had seen them attack Uncle Lin. Since we had arrived in time, those cow-noses didn't get what they wanted. However, the grudge between them had deepened after a few encounters. I stretched my hand to pull the fat man. I felt strange. When the young Taoist priest saw me and the fat man, he didn't act as if he had seen an enemy. It seemed he didn't recognize us. When the fat man swung his fists and was about to attack, the young Taoist priest looked scared. He retreated a few steps and screamed, "Don't!" This action was different from the Taoist priests of Mount Longhu that we had seen before. The fat man was still angry, so he didn't realize that something was wrong. When I pulled him, he didn't stop. Instead, he dodged my hand and punched the young Taoist priest. However, his fist didn't come into contact with the little Taoist. Just as he came into contact with the shade of the tree, a screen of light rose up at the intersection of the shade and the sunlight. Not only did it block his fist, it even sent his body flying back a distance away. When I saw the fat man's attack, I was about to use my true energy to stop him. But now that he was pushed back, I quickly used my true energy to catch him in midair. Unexpectedly, the restriction's rebound was too strong. After I caught the fat man, I felt a strong force pushing me back a few steps. After he steadied himself, the fatty jumped out of my arms. He looked at the young Taoist boy in front of him and lowered his voice. "Third baby, be careful. There's something strange about this forest. Just now, when I threw a punch, I received a direct counterattack. The force was far greater than what I used." I didn't need the fatty to remind me. At this moment, my heart became much more solemn. Just as I was about to study the seal, the little Taoist in the shade of the forest took a few steps forward. He looked at us and said in a low voice, "I told you not to hit me, but you didn't listen. Her Highness has set up a fatal seal in this forest. People from the outside can't enter, and people from the inside can't leave. If you try to break the seal with brute force, the Highness seal will return 10 times the force," the little Taoist said in a low voice. His face was full of dejection, and it seemed as if he had been wronged beyond measure. After listening to him, I understood that the young Taoist wasn't hiding here. He was trapped here. He had thrown the pebble at us on purpose. It seemed he had no choice but to do so. The pebble that hit the fatty's head was probably because we had stopped and he hadn't stopped yet. That was why he had unintentionally hit us. However, after understanding it, I felt even more strange. What was so strange about this forest? Why was there such a seal? The little Taoist said that this seal was a fatal seal. Was it related to the fatal position here? Also, who was the Her Highness he mentioned? While I frowned and pondered, the fatty looked angry and started arguing with the little Taoist boy. "You little cow nose, you knew there was a seal here, but you didn't tell us on purpose. Did you want to make fun of me? I knew that the cow noses of your Dragon Tiger Mountain, from top to bottom, aren't good people." The little Taoist looked wronged. "I told you not to hit us, but you didn't listen. I think you're not a good person." Seeing that the two of them were about to quarrel again, I quickly extended my hand to stop the fatty. The people of Dragon Tiger Mountain naturally weren't good people, but the little Taoist boy in front of us was only at the dragon-seeking realm. Although we hated the people of Dragon Tiger Mountain, we didn't need to vent our anger on a child. After thinking for a while, I cupped my hands at the little Taoist boy and said, "This brother of mine has such a temper. Please forgive him, little Taoist. Little Taoist priest, why did you summon us over just now?" After hearing my apology, the little Taoist's complexion became slightly better. He looked at the fatty with fear before turning his head and saying to me, "You are walking up the mountain. Are you going to the Holy Mother Temple up there?" I nodded. "That's right." Hearing my answer, the little Taoist hurriedly waved his hand. "The cultivation of the two of you is definitely higher than mine, but the goddess in the Holy Mother Temple on the mountain is very powerful. Furthermore, she is temperamental and the most frightening. I called you just now to advise you not to go over to avoid being harmed." This was the second time he mentioned the so-called Her Highness. I couldn't help but ask, "Who is this Her Highness that you mentioned?" The little Taoist seemed to have recalled something horrifying as his face turned pale. He took a deep breath and was silent for a while before replying, Actually, I don't know either. I heard it from Martial Uncle and the others." Martial Uncles? I glanced at the Taoist robe and Taoist crown that the little Taoist boy was wearing. Since he was from Dragon Tiger Mountain, it was impossible for him to come here alone. The martial uncles that he mentioned should be someone with a higher cultivation in Dragon Tiger Mountain. I didn't care about the people from Dragon Tiger Mountain for the time being and started thinking. Last night, when Wu Yu came to find me, She said that she was the owner of Mount Tai's Holy Mother Temple. This little Taoist boy said that there was a Her Highness in the Holy Mother Temple. It sounded like he was talking about Wu Yu. However, from my interaction with Wu Yu, she always had a smile on her face. I couldn't relate her to the temperamental Her Highness that the little Taoist boy mentioned. After thinking for a while, I asked, "Have you seen that Her Highness? Do you know what she looks like?" The little Taoist boy looked behind him and shook his head. Only senior martial brothers and martial uncles have seen the Her Highness. However, they were knocked unconscious by the Her Highness and haven't woken up yet. The Her Highness said that we didn't listen to her advice and didn't want to leave early. That's why she locked us in this fate-denying seal. She said that she would only let us out when we find our two missing martial uncles. Following the little Taoist's gaze, I looked behind him. Only then did I see that about 10 steps behind him, under a relatively thick tree trunk, there were quite a few adult men lying on the ground. The light was very dim, but due to the close distance, I could roughly see that they were all dressed as Taoist priests. Their cultivation bases were all different, and there seemed to be quite a number of them. Although the little Taoist boy didn't confirm the Her Highness' identity, to be able to subdue so many Taoist priests of Mount Longhu at the same time, the so-called Her Highness cultivation level was definitely not low. Furthermore, Wu Yu's cultivation level was also at the Yang God realm. It was already very unusual for a Yang God celestial master to appear in a small place like Tower Village. The probability of two appearing at the same time was extremely small. Therefore, this so-called Her Highness was most likely Wu Yu. As for the temperamental, that the little Taoist boy mentioned, I didn't really care. His perception is only based on his own position. In fact, I've seen many of Mount Longhu's actions. In my opinion, Wu Yu only injured these cow noses of Mount Longhu and locked them up here. He didn't take their lives. That's already very merciful. As I pondered, I asked the little Taoist boy, "Thank you, little Taoist, for telling me the truth. However, I still have a question. May I know how many people from little Taoist sect are on this trip? Also, why did you have a conflict with the Her Highness?" The little Taoist boy was simple-minded and didn't suspect anything. Hearing my question, he told me everything he knew. There were a total of 33 of us on this trip. Originally, we had come to kill an evil person. However, in the temple on the mountain, we discovered traces left behind by the seniors of our sect. Therefore, we came to investigate. Later, the two martial uncles who were leading the group said that they had discovered some treasure in the mountain and that they had to bring it back to their sect. In the process of searching for the treasure, they alarmed the Her Highness in the temple. According to senior brother, the Her Highness' temper was good at the beginning and she communicated with the martial uncles. Afterwards, I don't know what they said, but the Her Highness suddenly became angry. She alone injured all of us. Only 2 martial uncles escaped. The rest of us were all locked up here. Because my cultivation level was too low, I didn't enter the Her Highness front hall. That's why I wasn't injured. Chapter 680. The little Taoist priest's words were full of sincerity, so it was obvious that he wasn't trying to deceive us. He was merely advising us to leave out of pure goodwill. Looking at his childish face, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. While I was thinking about how to answer him, the fat guy on the side curled his lips and sneered. "What's going on in Mount Tai Goddess Temple? Why don't we just go and take a look? Don't listen to this little Taoist's alarmist talk. Besides, so what if that Empress really exists? We're not like this bunch of good-looking but useless silver-looking spearheads from Mount Longhu. When the time comes, if she wants to cause trouble, we'll let her witness Lord Fatty's methods." After saying that, he lifted his foot and was about to go up the mountain. Although Fatty said it out of anger, his words were crude. Now, with Fatty's and my cultivation, even if we were to face Celestial Master Yang Shun, we would still be able to protect ourselves. Even if this goddess temple of Mount Tai was really a dragon's pool and tiger's den, it would not be so scary that we would not be able to move forward. It's just that this young Taoist from Mount Longhu has good intentions, so there's no need for me to be fierce towards him. Thus, I smiled amiably and said, "Us two brothers came up the mountain with a prior appointment, so there's no reason for us to break it. Thank you for your kind advice, little Taoist. Let's part ways here." Then, I cupped my hands in greeting and left the forest with the fatty, heading up the mountain. The young Taoist was trapped alone in the forest, and had to take care of the other heavily injured people. It was truly quite pitiful. However, there weren't many people as pure and kind as the young Taoist on Mount Longhu. In addition to the enmity between us, it was already good enough that I didn't hit him when he was down. There was absolutely no reason for me to help him. Seeing that we were determined to go up the mountain, the little Taoist still didn't give up. He shouted loudly behind us, "Benefactor, if you really want to go, there's no harm in waiting a little longer." Even though my two martial uncles were defeated by the Empress and escaped, they definitely won't leave the matter at that. They must have gone to get reinforcements. You can wait for my martial uncle to come back and then go up the mountain together. At that time, when that concubine harms people again, my martial uncle will be able to protect you. This little fellow really doesn't know how to persuade people. Not to mention the deep enmity between me and the people of Mount Longhu. Even if we didn't have any enmity, after hearing these words, I most likely wouldn't wait for his martial uncle to return. I had already decided to go up the mountain, so I didn't pay attention to the young Taoist. I took the fatty with me and walked on the mountain path. Shortly after, I couldn't see the young Taoist anymore. But in my mind, I began to ponder over what he had said before. First of all, Mount Longhu had sent more than 30 people. Although their cultivations weren't too high, just from the number of people, it was the largest I had seen Mount Longhu mobilize in the past few years. The little Taoist said that they had only come here in the beginning to hunt down a heretical devil, which was probably Lu Zhenyang. However, I felt that it wasn't the case. If it was just to capture Lu Zhenyang, it would be useless to bring ordinary cultivators. It would be better to send a few strong cultivators to form a small team to capture him. That way, the chances of success would be higher. From this, it was possible that Mount Longhu had come here with a purpose. However, they hadn't even told their own people about this purpose. That was why the young Taoist didn't know about it. Moreover, the young Taoist said that they had found the aura of a senior from their sect in Mount Taishan's Saint Mother Temple. It was possible that the traveling Taoist mentioned in the legend was from Mount Longhu. From this point, besides dealing with Lu Zhenyang, Mount Longhu had come here for two reasons. One was for Chiyo's tomb, and the other was to find this Taoist. Of course, the other possibility was that this Taoist was related to Chiyo's tomb, and the two things were connected. I didn't know if it was the case or not. Only when we arrived at Mount Taishan's Saint Mother Temple and met Wu Yu would we know. After thinking for half an hour, we finally reached the entrance of Mount Taishan's Saint Mother Temple. However, when we looked at the temple in front of us, the fatty and I became doubtful. Whether it was the tourist brochure in the hotel at the foot of the mountain or Wu Yu's appearance last night, I had the impression that Mount Taishan's Saint Mother Temple was a place full of incense. However, the temple in front of us wasn't like that at all. On the surface, I could still vaguely see the grandeur and delicacy of the past, but now all that was left was a pile of broken walls. The only place that still looked like a temple was the main hall, but compared to the temples I had seen before, it was still very old. The roof and courtyard were covered in weeds, and the side halls on both sides were half collapsed. It was impossible to tell what it looked like in the past. If it weren't for the signboard that read Mount Taishan's Saint Mother Temple, I would have suspected that I had come to the wrong place. After a long while, the fatty sighed. This Mount Taishan's Saint Mother Temple is too simple, right? I nodded and suppressed my curiosity. I stopped paying attention to the dilapidated exterior and started to study the location of the temple from the perspective of feng shui. Although I had seen it before, I could only see it from afar. I could tell that it was a fatal spot, but I couldn't see the details. After studying it carefully, I discovered that although the suicide spots here are dangerous, they don't actually cover the entire area. There are still many places with vitality. If the traveling Taoist could see the dangerous feng shui of Tower Village, he could also see these minor details. However, after studying it for a long time, I found that this Mount Taishan's Saint Mother Temple had many places that avoided the places with vitality. From this point of view, the Mount Taishan's Saint Mother Temple had the ability to break the fatal spot. However, it wasn't the best choice. It couldn't fully display its power. While I was puzzled, the fatty had already started to walk in. I hurried to follow him. The fatty took the lead and headed straight for the main hall. After a short while, he arrived at the main hall. I followed behind him and walked in together with him. The main hall was still dilapidated, but compared to the dilapidated walls outside, it was like the difference between heaven and earth. After observing the place for a while, my eyes were attracted by a pile of cow bones in the corner of the wall. The pile of skulls was pale white, and they looked a little yellow. They were piled up in the corner of the wall, away from the light. They looked like countless evil ghosts, which would make people fall into a trance. I pulled myself together and looked at them. The cow skulls looked like they had been thrown here and piled up randomly. However, they had some kind of rule. It was similar to a formation, but it wasn't a formation. It was more like a rare sacrificial altar. In the world of metaphysics, cows were magical animals. Their tears could ward off evil spirits and spirits. In some places in Tibet and Inner Mongolia, cows were used as totems to ward off evil spirit. However, this is the first time in my life that I've seen an altar made out of a cow's skull. I only vaguely remember seeing similar records in some Taoist classics, but I can't recall the specific details at the moment. While I was looking at the cow bones, the fatty walked around. When he returned, he said to me, "It's strange. There's a plaque that says Mount Taishan's Saint Mother Temple, but why isn't there a statue? And that Wu Yu, didn't she say that she's the owner of this place? Why hasn't she appeared even though we've been here for so long?" My attention was completely focused on the cow bone altar. When I heard the fatty say that, I looked around. Just as he had said, there were no statues or incense burners here. Other than the pile of cow bones, the Mount Taishan's Saint Mother Temple was destitute. I really didn't know how the Taoist priests from Mount Longhu had found the traces of their seniors here. "You're a little late." While I was thinking, Wu Yu's voice suddenly came from outside the main hall. Hearing the voice, the fatty and I looked at each other and followed the voice. When I came out of the room, I looked around. I didn't see Wu Yu, but I saw a painting hanging on the wall on the left side of the door. I didn't know when this painting had been hung there. After being exposed to the sun and rain, it had become dilapidated like the side halls on both sides. The painting paper had also turned dark yellow, the same color as the surrounding walls. It looked very hidden. That was why we didn't notice it when we came here. When I walked over to take a look, I strangely found that there was a painting of a lady drawn in ink on this dilapidated painting. It wasn't damaged at all. What shocked me even more was that the lady in the painting was Wu Yu, whom I had met last night. Chapter 681. After Wu Yu appeared from the painting, her clothes became the same modern clothes as last night. However, the bun on her head was still the same as in the painting. With a faint smile on her gentle face, she walked toward us through the shadows under the eaves. Her footsteps were gentle, but her speed wasn't slow at all. In the blink of an eye, she arrived in front of me and the fatty. However, we were standing under the sun, and she didn't seem to like the sunlight. She frowned and didn't say anything. Then, she flashed into the main hall. After entering, Her movements became gentle again, and she returned to her calmness from last night. From her gait, rather than saying that she was walking, it was more like she was floating. In addition, she was afraid of the sunlight, so I made a judgment in my heart. She was a ghost. Only ghosts had no weight. When they walked, it was as though they were floating in the air. They were extremely fast. It was the same for Tong Tong and the snake spirit, who were sleeping on my body. One of them was a ghost infant, while the other was a snake spirit soul. They had no weight and they walked very fast. On the other hand, when a ghost cultivated to the heavenly master realm, they were no longer afraid of sunlight. However, out of instinct they still hated sunlight. It was the same for Wu Yu, Tong Tong, and the snake spirit. This was also the reason why Wu Yu didn't want to stand under the sun and communicate with us. Instead, she flashed into the main hall. I called the fatty and returned to the main hall. I raised my head to look at Wu Yu. Her cultivation was profound. Although she was a ghost, her body was extremely solid. She was no different from an ordinary person. Even I couldn't see the difference. At this moment, Wu Yu stood in the main hall. She turned her head and looked around. She sighed and said, "This place used to be full of incense. Back then, when we escaped from Mount Longhu, we passed by the village at the foot of the mountain. We found something strange about this place, so we built a temple here and stayed. On one hand, we helped the villagers solve their doubts, and on the other, we explored the mysteries of this place. The villagers loved and respected us. At first, I was a little confused, but I soon got it. This Wu Yu was actually Taoist Junyo's Taoist companion. This Mount Tai Saint Mother Temple was built by them together. No wonder she said that she was the master of the goddess temple of Mount Tai." At this moment, Wu Yu's voice paused for a moment. He turned his head and his gaze landed on the ox bone altar in the corner. He continued, "The two of us stayed here for 2 years. The Taoist priest finally discovered the secret of this place. He told me to guard the temple here and not let anyone else, especially the people from Dragon Tiger Mountain, discover this place. After that, he went to that place and this trip lasted for 100 years. After the Taoist priest left, I was left alone. During this time, the Taoist priests from Dragon Tiger Mountain passed by here several times. Although they didn't see my shadow, they still made me very afraid. If the Taoist priest was here, the two of us could join forces and the Taoist priest of Mount Longhu wouldn't be our match. However, the Taoist priest didn't come out. I was afraid of being discovered by the people of Mount Longhu, so I entered the dreams of the villagers and had them destroy my temple. I tore down the sculptures and side halls. From then on, the incense sticks in this place withered and people were rarely seen. That's how we had 100 years of peace." Wu Yu retracted his gaze and looked at the forest at the foot of the mountain. He continued, "But a month ago, the Taoist priest of Mount Longhu still found this place. Even though I cleaned up the traces I left behind hundreds of times, they still found some clues. Even the thing that my Taoist priest was looking for was found by them. They thought that after discovering these things, they would be able to force me to submit. However, things are different now. I've been protecting the Taoist priest for all these years and I've already become a Yang God Celestial Master, so those people are no match for me. In the end, only a Peak Celestial Master and a Yang God Celestial Master escaped with injuries. The others were trapped in the extinction seal by me." After saying so much in one breath, Wu Yu's voice finally stopped. I, on the other hand, felt a little dizzy as I thought about what she had said. According to her, she and her Taoist companion originally had a grudge against Mount Longhu. After they escaped, they lived here and built this temple. Later, the two of them found something in this place. The Taoist priest went to look for it, while she stayed here to wait. Recently, people from Mount Longhu came to find them. This story sounded reasonable, but I still had some questions in my heart. First of all, her cultivation base. Generally speaking, ghosts were slightly weaker than human celestial masters at the same realm. However, Wu Yu was only a Yang God Celestial Master, yet she was able to injure a Yang God Celestial Master and a Peak Celestial Master of Mount Longhu. She also captured so many people with lower cultivation bases. This shocked me. Secondly, although this story sounded normal, it had nothing to do with me. Why did she know about me? Why did she go down the mountain to find me and ask me to leave this place? I still didn't have an answer. Finally, the Taoist priest mentioned in her story went to a place and didn't come out for 100 years. I came here at Lu Zhenyang's invitation. Although Lu Zhenyang didn't say it clearly, I guessed that he wanted to enter Chiyo's skull tomb. In that case, was the place that the Taoist priest went to Chiyo's skull tomb? There were many questions. I thought about it and felt that I should first ask about the grudge between the couple and Mount Longhu. I raised my head to look at Wu Yu and asked her, "May I know what kind of grudge there is between Senior and Mount Longhu?" Wu Yu shook her head, her expression a little gloomy. She said, "It's not really a grudge. It's just a grudge. Back then, my Taoist priest was also a member of Mount Longhu and a Taoist of Mount Longhu. After we became Taoist companions, we were not accepted by Mount Longhu. That celestial master Zhang even forced my Taoist priest to kill me. Of course, the Taoist priest didn't kill me. Instead, he took me away from there and hid from Mount Longhu. In the end, with the help of the dangerous terrain, we escaped from Mount Longhu and settled down. The people of the righteous Tao of Mount Longhu were actually Taoist priests who didn't become monks. They could marry and eat meat. However, the Taoist of the righteous Tao was different. On Mount Longhu, other than Celestial Master Zhang, the person with the highest status was the Taoist. Unlike Celestial Master Zhang, who was hereditary and relied on bloodline inheritance, the Taoist was chosen from all the disciples with the best physique and established from a young age. Every time a Taoist died, another Taoist would be chosen. Therefore, the Taoist of Mount Longhu usually had an extremely high cultivation base. Under the circumstances that Celestial Master Zhang wouldn't easily appear, they almost represented the highest combat power of Mount Longhu. I never expected that the Taoist priest who built the Temple of Mount Tai would have such an identity. I opened my mouth, but I didn't know what to say. Love was the most complicated thing in the world. It was unbelievable that the Taoist priest, as a Taoist priest, would fall in love with a ghost like Wu Yu. After all, Mount Longhu had always taken the responsibility of slaying demons and devils. They were the most ruthless towards evil beings and wanted to get rid of them as soon as possible. Under such circumstances, Mount Longhu naturally couldn't tolerate a pair of ill-fated lovebirds like them. After listening to this story, I thought of Tao Wu. Our situation was quite similar to that of the couple. Fortunately, my identity wasn't like the Taoist priest. Otherwise, there would have been more twists and turns. And this story also answered my first question. The cultivation of the Taoist of Mount Longhu must be extraordinary. Since Wu Yu was his Taoist companion, he must have learned some things from him. With the body of a ghost, under the circumstances of the same cultivation, defeating a human cultivator was not too unbelievable. After pondering for a moment, I was about to ask other questions when Wu Yu spoke first. She looked at me with a faint smile and suddenly asked, "When the two of you went up the mountain, you must have seen the Taoist priests in the forest, right?" I nodded. I didn't understand why she suddenly mentioned this. Before I could figure it out, Wu Yu continued, "At first, the two of you didn't listen to my advice and insisted on staying here. I wanted to send the two of you into the suicide seal, but after thinking about it, I gave up on that idea." I frowned and looked up at her. I didn't know what she meant by that. Seeing that I didn't say anything, Wu Yu said with a smile, "Mr. Zhou, you have the Xian Yuan sword in your hand, and Brother Linhu is a formation genius. Although my suicide seal is powerful, it can't trap the two of you. If I let you in, it won't take long for the formation to be broken. When that time comes, the Taoist priests of Mount Longhu will benefit. My expression instantly changed. I was about to ask her how she knew about me, but before I could ask, she told me more about me. She even knew about the Xian Yuan sword. She also told me about the fatty's identity. Chapter 682. I even felt a little panicked. If she hadn't told me Wu Yue's identity, I wouldn't have known anything about her. But not only did she know my identity, but she also knew my secret. This feeling was as if someone had stripped me naked and thrown me on the street. It was extremely uncomfortable, and my heart was filled with a strong sense of unease. I took a deep breath and stared at Wu Yue. I asked coldly, "You called us up the mountain just to tell us this? Who are you? How do you know my identity?" However, Wu Yu still had a faint smile on his lips. With a calm expression, he replied, "I told you last night that I called you guys up the mountain to show you something." After saying that, she suddenly changed her tone and pointed to the oxbone altar at the side. "Just now, I saw Mr. Zhou staring at this altar. Could it be that you recognize it?" Yes. This spirit was unpredictable. I didn't know what she meant. I was silent for a while and didn't answer her question. Instead, I asked, "Is the thing you want us to see this altar?" Wu Yue shook her head. "Not really, but it's related to this altar." I frowned again. I did recognize this altar. Not only did I recognize it, but I also had a deep impression of it. Before I went to Chiyo's shoulder demon tomb, I looked up a lot of information about Chiyu and saw this kind of altar in a Taoist book. After a moment of silence, I looked at Wu Yue and nodded. This altar is called the one-legged ox altar. It was originally used to worship the ancient god of war. I wonder which god did you build this altar here to worship? After getting my answer, Wu Yue's expression changed slightly. She repeated the words one-legged ox altar. Finally, she looked enlightened. She turned to me and said, "Oh, it's called the one-legged ox altar. Mr. Zhou is really knowledgeable." The gratitude on her face wasn't fake, but it was my turn to be puzzled. This temple was built by her and her husband, and the altar inside was naturally no exception. However, she built the one-legged ox altar, but she didn't even know its name. It was really strange. Seeming to see my confusion, Wu Yue explained with a smile, "Mr. Zhou, you don't have to be surprised. This one-legged ox altar was built by my Taoist priest. I didn't participate in it. When the two of us came here, I was responsible for building the temple, while he went into the mountains behind. After the temple was completed, he came out of the mountain and built the altar. I didn't ask him any questions at the time. He said that after the altar was finished, he could use it to go to a certain place and obtain an ancient text. Later, after the altar was finished, he went inside. He was gone for 100 years. It was the second time Wu Yu had mentioned that the Taoist priest had gone somewhere. I frowned and couldn't help but ask, "Where is that place you're talking about? Chiyo's tomb?" Wu Yu was silent for a moment, but he shook his head. "Chiyu? I don't know either. The Taoist priest didn't tell me, and I didn't ask." I didn't know what to make of her answer. After thinking for a while, I remembered that she had mentioned the word ancient book. If the place she mentioned was Chiyo's tomb, and she mentioned that the Taoist priest wanted to get an ancient book from there, then it was very likely that this ancient book was the second volume of the death scripture that Lao Ai mentioned. Thinking of this, I panicked again. Up until now, only Lao Ai and I knew about the death scripture. If my speculation was correct, the Taoist priest was the third person to know about it. The Xianyuan sword that Wu Yu mentioned earlier and the death scripture were the deepest secrets in my heart. Not only did it involve my cultivation, but it also involved Lao Ai. I looked at Wu Yu, and my pupils constricted slightly. I opened my mouth, wanting to ask again, but I didn't know where to start. After a moment of silence, I found some problems. Just now, when Wu Yu mentioned my Xianyuan sword and the fatty's identity, she had a smile on her face, as though she had deliberately mentioned it to us. But this time, she had said it unintentionally, as though she hadn't realized it herself. If I were to rashly ask about it now, I might expose my own secret. So, after a moment of silence, I asked Wu Yu, "Do you think that ancient book has a name?" Wu Yu looked confused. "I only heard the Taoist priest mention it. As for the name, I don't know either." From her expression, it was obvious that she didn't mean to hide it. I heaved a sigh of relief, but I still didn't dare to relax. Even if Wu Yu didn't know, the Taoist priest definitely knew something. Otherwise, he wouldn't have specifically said that he wanted to find that ancient book. Moreover, what Wu Yu said was something from 100 years ago. Although the Taoist priest didn't seem to be able to come out of that place, no one could be sure of the exact situation. Perhaps the Taoist priest had already obtained the second volume of the Death Scripture. Judging from the power of the first volume of the Death Scripture, if the Taoist priest had really obtained the second volume, his cultivation would have reached an unknown level. It would be almost impossible for me to obtain it again. Wu Yu sighed and said, "All these years I've been to that place many times, but there were no traces of the ancient book. Let's not talk about this first. Since Mr. Zhou knows about this altar, why don't you tell me the details?" She was asking about the altar, but my mind was still on the so-called ancient book. I thought about her words. She was still waiting for the Taoist priest, which meant that the Taoist priest hadn't come out of that place. She said that she had been to that place many times but couldn't find the ancient book. It seemed that the so-called ancient book had most likely not been found by the Taoist priest. Thinking about this, I felt a little more at ease. Then, I told her about the altar. According to the records I had read, the Kuei ox was also known as the Thunder Beast. It was a strange beast with a kuei shape like an ox, one leg, and no horns on its head. It was pale gray, and when it entered and exited the water, there would be wind and rain. It could produce the sound of thunder, and it was accompanied by the light of the sun and the moon. The earliest record of it was in the classic of mountains and seas, Great Desolate East. It was said that the East Sea had billowing waves mountain. This mountain was about 7,000 li away from the coast. There was a beast on the mountain that looked like an ox. It was completely gray, had no horns, and only had one leg. Every time it appeared, there would be a storm. Its body shone with light like the sun and the moon, and its roar was as ear-splitting as thunder. This beast's name was Kuei. Later on, the Yellow Emperor obtained the Kuei ox and used its skin to make a drum. He also used the Thunder Beast's bones to make drumsticks. When he beat the drum, the sound of the drum could be heard from 500 li away, frightening the enemy soldiers and subduing the world. In the Battle of Zhulu, the Yellow Emperor was able to defeat Qiyu and bury Qiu's body in a foreign land. This drum made of the Kuei ox's skin played an important role. Later on, Qiu's tribe killed the ox and used its skull to create this kind of altar to worship Qiu. After listening to me talk about the Kuei ox altar, Wu Yu pondered for a while. Then, she smiled at us and said, "Mr. Zhou, you know the story of this altar, but you don't know its function. Mr. Zhou, please watch carefully. Wu Yu will show you the ability of this altar. In addition, the item that I invited you to here today is also in this altar." Then, she urged her true essence. Her 10 fingers moved back and forth like butterflies flying through flowers. As the true essence flowed from her fingertips, beams of light appeared and scattered on the altar. I didn't know what she was doing, but I could guess that she was activating the Kuei ox altar. At this moment, I still wasn't sure if Wu Yu was an enemy or a friend. However, since she had talked to me for so long and hadn't made a move, she shouldn't be hostile for the time being. Thus, I remained silent and let her do whatever she wanted. About 15 minutes later, as the last beam of light from Wu Yu's fingertips dissipated, something strange happened in the room. On the Kuei ox altar, The ox skulls that had been piled together seemed to come to life and floated in the air. The empty eye sockets on the skulls suddenly emitted a white moonlight, and the mouth and nose spewed out a gray mist. In the blink of an eye, it filled the entire hall. The fatty and I didn't know what the mist was. Our expressions changed, and we raised our hands to disperse it. At this moment, Wu Yu's voice rang in our ears. "Misters, you don't have to do this. The gray mist is harmless." Hearing her say that, I stopped moving. However, I was still careful and sealed my mouth and nose to prevent myself from inhaling the gray mist. At the same time, I signaled the fatty with my eyes. I didn't know if the fatty understood what I meant, but at this moment, the yellowed ox skulls suddenly swayed in the gray mist. The white moonlight in their eye sockets reached its peak and even separated from them. They were like bright eyeballs that gathered above our heads. At this moment, Wu Yu suddenly clasped her hands together. The light that had gathered expanded again, completely enveloping the three of us. Outside the white light, the yellowed ox skulls seemed to come to life. They opened their mouths and roared silently at the vast sun through the broken roof. Chapter 683. As soon as I realized that something was wrong with the surrounding environment, I activated the true essence in my body and vigilantly observed my surroundings. After cultivating for so many years, I had already developed this habit. After waiting for a while and seeing that there was no danger, I relaxed a little and lifted my eyes to look around. It was extremely dark here, and there seemed to be countless black gauze floating in the air, obscuring my vision. I couldn't even see the things in front of my feet clearly. I could only vaguely feel that I was standing in a pile of white stones. These stones were big and small, and they were all piled up chaotically. Most of them were bare, and only a few of them had some withered wormwood growing on them. The air was filled with a desolate aura, as if I was in the middle of a wilderness. I couldn't see clearly with my naked eyes, so I used my clear insight power to look around. The clear insight power didn't disappoint me. This time, the black gauze in front of my eyes finally disappeared, and my surroundings became much clearer. However, when I saw the white stones and wormwood, I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine. This wasn't a wilderness, but an ancient battlefield. Those white things weren't stones, but piles of weathered corpses and bones. These corpses, without exception, were all incomplete. Some were lying flat on the ground, with pale skulls and empty eye sockets. Some had rusted spears stuck in their bodies, but they didn't fall down. Instead, they grabbed the corpses of their enemies and knelt on the battlefield. There were also some corpses that were piled up in groups of 3 to 5. It was probably because the battle had progressed to the end, and both sides were exhausted. Their weapons, spears, swords, and halberds had long been worn out to the point that they couldn't be used anymore. Thus, they had given up on their weapons and fought barehanded on the bloody battlefield. They had used their nails, teeth, and the strongest and most powerful parts of their bodies to fight against their opponents. I even saw a large pile of corpses not far from me, which had been piled up into a small hill. At the top of the hill was a corpse that was kneeling on the ground, biting the neck of another corpse. I didn't know how many years had passed, but the flesh and blood of that corpse had already turned into a pile of white bones. However, he still hadn't let go of his teeth, nor had he let go of his enemy. I looked around at the corpses in all sorts of postures. It was hard to imagine what kind of battle had taken place here. With the support of the power of insight, I could see very far away. However, when I looked around, all I could see was grayish-white bones as far as the eye could see. It was as though the entire land was piled up with corpses, and there was no end to it. I was puzzled. Wu Yu had said that I could reach a certain place through the altar in the goddess's temple. I had always thought that I would reach Chiyo's tomb. However, the ancient battlefield in front of me is even larger than Tower Village. This isn't Chiyo's tomb, it's a strange space that can't be seen from the outside world. A gust of wind blew past, and the war flags that had not been eroded by the passage of time fluttered in the wind on the decayed flagpoles. In this desolate environment, even the sound of the wind seemed to be sobbing, making people feel miserable just by hearing it. I looked up at the flagpole. Although the scarlet flag was broken, it was still fluttering slowly. I could vaguely see the image of a vigorous bull on it. In ancient times, when two armies faced off against each other, there would be war flags with the name of the army or the surname of the general. It was used to distinguish the two opposing sides, and it was also used to display military might. This method had been passed down since ancient times. However, during the desolate antiquity era, due to the productivity and embroidery skills of that time, there were no embroidery words or army numbers on the war flags. However, the ancient ancestors would draw their own tribe's totem on the war flags to display military might. The Chiyu totem was recorded in detail in the ancient clan record. Coincidentally, I had seen it before. According to historical records, among the ancient ancestors, the Juli tribe led by Chiyu had mainly used the totem of a bull and a totem of a bird. As I thought about this, I could roughly guess where I was. According to the annals of the 5 emperors, Chiyu rebelled and didn't need an emperor's decree. Hence, the Yellow Emperor sent troops to fight Chiyu in the wilderness of Zhuolu. This was obviously the battlefield of the Zhuolu War. If my guess was correct, although the Kuei altar hadn't sent us to Chiyo's tomb, this place was clearly related to Chiyo's tomb. I couldn't figure out the specific connection for the time being, but I believed that after some exploration, I would be able to find some clues. Hence, I stopped thinking about other things and focused on the fatty and Wuyue. Just now, when Wuyue activated the altar, the white light that surged out covered the 3 of us. Hence, when I teleported here, the 2 of them should have arrived here as well. However, the teleportation process separated us. Wuyue's cultivation base was profound, and the whole thing was under her control. After arriving here, there naturally wouldn't be any problems. I was worried about the fatty. He was timid to begin with. After seeing the surroundings, he would definitely be frightened. I didn't know where he was or if he was in danger. With that thought in mind, I took out the sound-transmitting talisman and prepared to contact the fatty. The sound-transmitting talisman had the effect of sending messages from 1,000 miles away. Fortunately, I had given the fatty a sound-transmitting talisman before coming here. Otherwise, I would have been at a loss in the face of such a situation. However, just as I took out the sound-transmitting talisman and didn't have time to use it, a gust of wind blew towards me. I frowned and immediately realized that the wind was a little strange. I didn't have time to contact the fatty and quickly put away the sound-transmitting talisman. Then, the true essence in my body surged out. From the moment I arrived at this ancient battlefield until now, the howling of the wind in the surroundings had never stopped. However, even though the surrounding wind was cold, it didn't make me feel any danger, much less the distinct stench of blood that I could smell at the tip of my nose. This wind was extremely fast. Just as I put away the sound-transmitting talisman, it arrived in front of me. The originally unclear light obviously dimmed a little. I raised my head and faced the cold wind. I blurted out the incantation that I had prepared. Suppress. After entering the Heaven Master realm, the incantation had become my most commonly used technique. Regardless of whether it was during the Heavenly Grand Ritual or when I fought against enemies, I had used the incantation many times. Moreover, my cultivation was gradually approaching the late stages of the Heaven Master realm. Thus, the incantation's power was much stronger than before. As the strong wind brushed against my face, I felt a dense smell of blood. It was as though a fierce tiger that had just eaten a meal was opening its huge mouth towards my face. As the huge mouth was about to descend, the smell of blood that I breathed in became denser. However, the incantation's power was absolute. Just as I finished speaking, the incantation's power landed on the strong wind and suppressed it. The strong wind was suppressed by the incantation's power. Its momentum clearly slowed, and it stopped in midair. I used my insight power to look over. I saw that the originally formless and colorless strong wind had suddenly revealed its form under the suppression of the incantation's power. Een Soul. The main body of this strong wind was a Een Soul. From its appearance, this Een Soul was an ancient warrior. He was over 8 feet tall and his eyes were wide open. A piece of beast skin covered his body, revealing his arms and thighs. I could faintly see the bulging veins on them. He waved his battle-axe and chopped down at me. Although he had a Een Soul body, the battle-axe was extremely solid. Looking at its power, even with my powerful physical body, I would be severely injured by this battle-axe. Apart from the power of the battle-axe, I also noticed that this Een Soul was extremely strange. Since I had started cultivating, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the number of Een Souls I had seen was innumerable. Those with higher cultivations included Wuyue, Tao Wu, and Tong Tong. As for those with lower cultivations, I had seen at least 100,000 in the Een Soul Valley, not far from the Fire God Temple. However, the Een Soul in front of me was different from Wuyue, Tong Tong, and the 100,000 Een Souls I had seen before. Een Souls were souls that had lost their heavenly souls. For example, the 100,000 Een Souls in the Een Soul Valley had lost their heavenly souls and their consciousness was scattered. Their souls were weak and they couldn't actively cultivate. At most, they could only become frightening ghosts. As for Tong Tong, after his physical body died, his heavenly soul remained. With his 3 souls intact, his consciousness was no different from that of an ordinary person. He was very suitable for cultivation. Hence, under my guidance, his cultivation could increase rapidly. The situation of the snake spirit was basically the same. As for Wuyue, although I wasn't very familiar with her, from her cultivation, it was most likely the same. However, the Een Soul in front of me was different from the 2 situations. This Een Soul's heavenly soul was still there, but it didn't have a consciousness. Although it had a certain amount of power, it obviously wasn't cultivated. Instead, it had absorbed the cold Een energy that was drifting in the ancient battlefield. After a long period of accumulation, it gradually gained a certain amount of power. Chapter 684. I studied it for a while, but I couldn't see through its mysteries. I could only guess that it was a ghost of an ancestor who had died on this ancient battlefield. Due to some reason, the heavenly soul couldn't leave the body and stayed in the soul. That was how it formed this strange ghost. Although the situation was strange, I didn't have time to study it. My priority now was to find the fatty. I took out a burning sun talisman from my pocket and poured my true essence into it. Then, I threw it at the ghost. The burning sun talisman was the most common yellow talisman. It was the lowest level of talismans. I could make it before I started searching for the dragon, so its power was just average. However, my cultivation base was close to the later stage of the seal realm. With my true essence, even the lowest level burning sun talisman could burst out with great power. On the other hand, although the ghost was fierce, it didn't have a high intellect. It didn't dodge and let the burning sun talisman hit its body. Under the urge of my true essence, the talisman exploded into a scorching fire dragon that enveloped the ghost and burned it into nothingness. It didn't even have the chance to scream. After dealing with the ghost, I put my hand into my pocket and took out the sound-transmitting talisman to contact the fatty. However, as soon as my finger touched the talisman, I felt a burst of heat. I was delighted. After I had made this talisman, I had only given it to the fatty and Zhang Canwen. The one who was contacting me this time was definitely the fatty. I hurried to take out the talisman and poured my true essence into it. Sure enough, it was the fatty who had sent me a message. "Third baby, where are you? Come and save me. Why are there so many ghosts here?" After reading the fatty's message, my face changed. The fatty was in trouble. He said that there were many ghosts. Did he encounter the same kind of ghosts I had just killed? I started to worry. Although these ghosts weren't weak, they didn't have any intellect. Their individual fighting capacity was very low. Even the fatty's cultivation base was enough to kill them. However, these kinds of ghosts without intellect would become terrifying when they reached a certain level. Since they didn't have intellect, once they started to attack, they wouldn't stop until they were dead. There was a limit to one's strength. If one exhausted all one's strength and still could not eliminate these souls, the only result would be being devoured by these souls. The fatty's description wasn't clear, so I couldn't guess his situation. I hurried to call him. What's going on? How many souls are there? However, after sending the message, I waited for a full minute, but the fatty didn't reply. With the fatty's current cultivation base, I didn't believe that he couldn't hold on for even a minute. There was only one reason why he didn't reply. He was currently being besieged by countless ghosts, and he couldn't free himself. I took a deep breath and looked around. However, the vast ancient battlefield seemed boundless. I didn't know where the fatty was at all. In a moment of desperation, I stomped on the ground and soared into the sky, trying to find the fatty's location. However, I didn't expect that after flying for less than 5 meters, there would be a commotion in the air. On the boundless ancient battlefield, it was as if my action of flying into the air had startled something. In an instant, countless gusts of wind surged from the horizon, bringing with them black smoke. They covered the sky and covered the earth as they surged towards me. The momentum was so great that it even covered the originally dim light in the surroundings. I used the Dongxian power to look at the strong gusts of wind coming from all directions. It was just as I had guessed. There was a screaming ghost in each gust of wind. Just like the one that had been burned, they all had heavenly souls, but they didn't have intellect. They were affected by the murderous aura of the ancient battlefield. Once they saw a living creature, they wouldn't stop until they were dead. Looking at the momentum around us, not only the fatty, but even I was shivering. I wasn't sure if I could resist them. How could the fatty, who had just reached the heavenly master realm and a portion of his cultivation was still sealed, resist them? I took a deep breath. Before the ghosts could pounce on me, I hurriedly activated my true yuan to send a message to the fatty. I told him that I couldn't find him at the moment and that he shouldn't panic. He should hold on and create some commotion so that it would be easier for me to find him. After I sent the message and put away the sound-transmitting talisman, the surrounding ghost army had already arrived in front of me. The distance between me and the ghosts at the forefront was less than 10 steps. With the speed of the ghosts, it would only take an instant for them to reach me. I wouldn't have enough time to escape. Of course, I didn't have any thoughts of escaping. I just stood at my original position and took out the armor-removing sword. From the scale of the army, it seemed that all the soldiers that had died on the battlefield had become ghosts. From this, it could be deduced that this was a completely sealed and mysterious place. The souls of the soldiers that had died that year couldn't dissipate and remained in their bodies. That was why these ghosts had heavenly souls but didn't have any consciousness. Facing such a large army of ghosts, I didn't have to destroy them. I had to protect myself and find the fatty to ensure his safety. If I were to rush forward and kill them, not only would I not be able to alleviate the danger that the fatty was facing, but I might also run in the wrong direction. If I couldn't defeat them, I might even lose my life. Time was of the essence. I didn't have much time to think. The ghost army at the forefront had already arrived in front of me and was about to pounce on me. At this critical moment, I couldn't care about anything else. I looked at the surging ghost army in front of me and waved my right hand. The armor-removing sword flew out. The moment I attacked, I used the emotionless sword that the hidden edge had taught me. The armor-removing sword was a natural magic tool that was extremely mysterious. Even though it was broken, its power was still extraordinary. especially under the activation of the hidden edge emotionless sword principle. With a swing of the sword, the souls within 3 meters in front of me were all minced, turned into gray mist, and dissipated in the surroundings. However, I didn't feel happy. Instead, my brows furrowed even deeper. As soon as I killed the ghosts within 3 meters of me, the ghost army behind me immediately surged forward. When they arrived in front of me again, there was still an endless sea of ghosts. Compared to the whole ghost army, the ghosts that I had killed just now were like a drop in the ocean. The second wave of ghosts arrived. I could only swing my sword again. I didn't even have the time to think. I swung my sword dozens of times in a row. I didn't know how many ghosts I had killed, but the ghosts in front of me continued to surge forward. After a full quarter of an hour, the situation finally changed. However, it wasn't in my favor, but in a direction that was even more disadvantageous to me. I didn't know how many times I had used the armor-removing sword, but all the ghosts within 10 feet of me disappeared. Only one ghost survived the power of the emotionless sword. He didn't even receive much damage. He stood there, clad in armor and holding a spear. Whether it was his aura or power, he was much stronger than the ghosts around him. It was obvious that this Een spirit was in existence similar to a general in the army of Een spirit. I didn't dare to let my guard down. I swung the armor-dismantling sword again. The emotional sword energy collided with the long spear in his hand. Then, the long spear broke, and the emotional sword energy surged forward. Not only did it kill the general who had charged forward, but it also pierced through the army of ghosts behind him. It destroyed dozens of ghosts in a row before vanishing completely. The armor-removing sword's power was still trustworthy. I was slightly more spirited. I took the opportunity to look inside myself. After this period of fighting, I had used up half of my Zhen Yuan. If this continued, I would only be able to hold on for another 15 minutes before my Zhen Yuan was completely exhausted. I didn't even count the general souls in the ghost army, which were obviously much stronger. In fact, when I looked up, I could see 4 or 5 general souls in my line of sight. The spirits were like a rising tide. This time, they didn't give me much time. Soon, they swarmed over me again. I could only absorb the true dragon chi from the jade bracelet as I swung my sword. The armor-removing sword was still sharp, and the emotionless sword was still reliable. However, my arm was starting to go numb. Facing the endless ghost army, I felt like I was hitting water with a sword. If I cut the water with a sword, the water would continue to flow. There was no end to it. I couldn't go on like this. I had to think of a way. Chapter 685. The last time I summoned Tong Tong was in the Fire God Temple. At that time, she told me that her cultivation base was at the peak of the middle stage of the Seal Realm. She just needed one more step to break through to the late stage of the Seal Realm. When she came out, I took a closer look. I hadn't seen her for a month, and she had indeed reached the late stage. Tong Tong was happy to see me. She smiled sweetly and asked, "Why did you summon me?" I didn't have time to answer. A spirit suddenly attacked Tong Tong. It was also a spirit, but Tong Tong was a heavenly embryo, and she had the cultivation base of a seal heavenly master. Her power wasn't something these spirits could compare to. I didn't need to remind him. Tong Tong waved his right hand, and a bolt of lightning appeared, striking the spirit that was coming at us. Heavenly lightning was the nemesis of spirit. Even a heavenly embryo like Tong Tong didn't dare to resist the power of heavenly lightning, let alone these spirits that didn't have any intelligence. When the spirit encountered the heavenly lightning, it didn't have a chance to survive. In just a blink of an eye, it turned into ashes. The remaining power of the lightning bolt didn't stop. It swam and entered the army of spirits, destroying a large number of them. Finally, it disappeared. I took a quick glance and found that the number of souls killed by the lightning bolt was more than the number of souls I had killed by using the armor-dismantling sword. In terms of power, Tong Tong wasn't as strong as me. However, everything had its counter. Using heavenly lightning to destroy spirits was the best choice. After Tong Tong had eliminated a large number of spirits, the surroundings quieted down. But then, a voice that sounded like a duck's quacking came from my back. "Handsome and great master, why did you summon me?" Although I was at a critical juncture in my cultivation just now, when I heard your call, I immediately stopped cultivating and immediately came out to see you. The spirit snake jumped down from my back. It seemed he had sensed Tong Tong's presence, so he immediately changed into a flattering manner. Listening to his quacking voice, I couldn't help but smile. The pressure on my body was relieved. The spirit snake had broken through to the heavenly master realm earlier than me and Tong Tong. Usually, he stayed in my body and used my blood to increase his cultivation base. Since he wanted to transform into a real dragon, I didn't call him out unless it was necessary. Looking at the time, I haven't seen him for a while. It was rare for this fellow to come out, so he was obviously more excited than Tong Tong. He didn't transform into his human form, but instead hovered around me and Tong Tong in his flood dragon form. I carefully looked at him. This fellow's body was much more solid than before. The scales on his body were no longer black, but rather dark gold. The signs of his dragon transformation were extremely obvious, especially the dragon horn on his forehead. When he had just transformed into a flood dragon, there was only a slight protrusion, but now it had grown into a horn that was 3 inches long. At first glance it looked majestic, and it really did look like a dragon. However, this fellow couldn't stay cool for more than 3 seconds. After circling around us a few times, he saw the ghost army around us. In just a blink of an eye, he hid behind Tong Tong and me. With a frightened face, he used his tail to point around. His voice trembled as he asked, "What's going on? Why were there so many ghosts? Brat, don't tell me you've brought me to the nether world?" This fellow's words always made people angry. I couldn't help but slap his head. "If you want to go to Gehenna, you can do it yourself. Don't curse me and Tong Tong." The serpent spirit realized that he had made a slip of the tongue. He laughed, but his voice was still trembling. "Where are we?" At this moment, the ghosts around us surrounded us again. I swung my sword several times, and Tong Tong also threw a lightning bolt to clear the ghosts around us. After everything was done, I took a deep breath and told them the situation we were facing. Tong Tong was the most considerate. After listening to me, she smiled at me and said, "Brother, don't worry. I'll call Little Snake. We'll deal with these ghosts together." Then, the girl turned to look at the serpent spirit. She smiled at him and asked, "What do you think, Little Snake?" The serpent spirit was the most timid one. Perhaps it was because he had died once, so he valued life and death a lot. After listening to Tong Tong, he turned to look at the huge ghost army. He wasn't even afraid of Tong Tong's threat. He shook his head like a rattle drum and shouted with his croaky voice, "No, there are so many ghosts. Even if you beat me to death, I won't do it." It was the first time he had seen him resist. Tong Tong was bewildered and didn't know what to do. I couldn't help but laugh as I watched from the side. I said to the snake spirit, "Little Snake, you're right. With so many spirits, no matter how powerful we are, we'll eventually be exhausted by them. At that time, we won't be their opponent." After listening to me, the serpent spirit's tears rolled down. He nodded at me and said, "Little Master, you understand, Little Snake. It's not that I'm timid, but there are too many ghosts. I was floating in the air, but I couldn't see the end of the ghost. We're not their opponents. If you ask me, how about this? We should take advantage of our current strength and kill our way out. What do you think? If possible, I'll be the vanguard." It was rare for him to be brave. After saying that, He patted his chest and prepared to rush out. I quickly pulled him back and said, "Don't worry. I want to ask you, have you ever thought about what would happen if we were exhausted by these ghosts?" The serpent spirit looked at me as if he was looking at a fool. "These ghosts are so cruel. What can we do then? We'll have to go to the real underworld." After saying that, he seemed to have imagined what would happen. He shivered and added, "Let's not talk nonsense. Let's run." I shook my head helplessly. "What happened to your brain? They are ghosts and you are also a ghost. It's obvious that these ghosts have found me. That's why they're coming here. They didn't notice you and Tong Tong. Didn't you notice? If we fight until the end, I'll be swallowed. You and Tong Tong are the same kind of ghosts. They won't attack you." After listening to me, the serpent spirit and Tong Tong were stunned. Then, they spoke at the same time. Tong Tong said anxiously, "Brother, why don't we listen to the little snake and run away first?" The serpent spirit was shocked. He said excitedly, "Hey, why didn't I think of that? Run my ass. Just watch and see how I devour these souls." I was speechless. Fortunately, the serpent spirit finally stopped running. I turned to comfort Tong Tong. Then, I asked them to help me resist the surrounding ghosts' attack. I took out the sound-transmitting talisman and checked it. There was still no news from the fatty. Then, I sent him 2 more messages to ask about his current situation. After sending the messages, I waited for a few breaths. It was the same as before. The fatty didn't reply. I didn't hear the fatty's reply, so I furrowed my eyebrows and pondered for a while. I tried to fly into the air to check again. However, after I had just leaped a few meters into the air, I felt some sort of pressure in the air. My body was getting heavier and heavier, and I couldn't fly anymore. Helplessly, I landed on the ground again. I asked Tong Tong and the serpent spirit to fly into the air to check. The 2 of them could fly high in the air, but it didn't work. It was because they couldn't see the surrounding situation. Even if they flew high in the air, they couldn't see much further than standing on the ground. I couldn't do anything about it. I could only wait for the fatty to respond. Then, I could determine his position and decide what to do next. I was confident in the fatty. He didn't lack innate talent or wisdom. Even if these spirits were really strong, the fatty would be able to resist them for a while. If he had the chance to set up a formation, he might even be able to resist longer than me. While waiting, I obviously had to do something. After sitting cross-legged to recover the Zhen Qi in my body, I was afraid that Tong Tong and the serpent spirit wouldn't be able to hold on. So, I called out to them and asked them to take a break. Tong Tong was really tired. He stopped when he heard me. However, the serpent spirit, who had been scared just now, laughed and shouted at the top of his voice, saying that he didn't need it. While shouting, he opened his mouth and swallowed the 2 ghosts next to him. He chewed a few times with a face full of enjoyment before swallowing them. He looked like a puppy that had snatched a few meat bones. It was obvious that he had tasted the sweetness of these ghosts. Although he had turned into a flood dragon, his body was the same as Tong Tong's. They were all ghosts. So, the ghosts in front of him were great supplements for him. Although Tong Tong was also a ghost, she had a kind nature. Moreover, when she was young, she had almost been swallowed by other ghosts. It had left a shadow in her heart. Naturally, she didn't want to swallow other ghosts. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.